Okay, good morning to us all. To get us started for today, we would like to remind all of us that the PSI is very active on social media. If you haven't already done so, we would kindly ask you to look for us on the various social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest. Kindly like, follow, and share our posts so that many more people from our communities and our followers would be able to see the good work the PSI is doing in terms of people over profits.
Good morning, everyone. Now, I think it's a particularly cruel kind of thing that we've had the LGBT and youth party last night with certain debates coming up this morning. So if that might be why a few of us aren't here yet again on this side of the room. Tomorrow, I want this side of the room full, but also this side of the room full as well. So today, as we all know, we've got a really important debate coming up, and I just wanted to give a shout out to all our LGBTQIA plus comrades who are in the room. I'm seeing flags being waved around the room. I am with you today, and I know a lot of people in this room are as well.
So before we continue today's section on Program of Action and Affiliate Resolution, we'll bring you a panel on the topic, The Future is Public.
Now, I'm excited to be part of this panel, so I should go and sit down.
All the best, Maddie. Facilitating this panel is Daria Cibrario. I invite Daria and the panel for the discussion. As you're already sitting there, let me kindly introduce Daria and then we start the discussions. So Daria has been PSI's policy officer in charge of local and regional government workers since 2015. Prior to this role, Daria served as elected sectorial secretary for the food and drink industry of the European Federation of Food, Tourism and Agriculture Trade Unions efforts in Brussels. She was also an international officer for the food and drink sector at the International Union of Food Workers, IUF, here in Geneva. She has held policy and research positions at the International Labour Organizations and its training center in Turin. Daria, over to you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, PSI Congress. Welcome to the plenary panel, The Future is Public. This is a very important conversation that we're going to have today. But I'd like to start this session with a simple and interactive test, which can perhaps also work as a morning stretching exercise. So please bear with me. So I'd like to ask you the following question, and just go for a show of hands. So how many of you have heard about the word privatization? Please raise your hand. Show me. I take it's basically everyone, right? Okay. Now, I would like to tell me how many of you have heard about the word insourcing as the opposite of outsourcing. Okay, quite some. That's not bad. Now, let's go to a more difficult one. How many of you have heard about remunicipalization? All right. A bit less, but okay, I'm quite impressed. I will not ask you how many of you can actually pronounce it, no? Okay, good. And last but not least, tell me, have you heard about renationalization? How many of you? All right, okay, good. So it's quite telling, I think, to start today's discussion that everyone has heard about privatization, but perhaps even within the labor movement, less among us have heard about the process of taking privatized services back into public ownership and control. And I think that's a good introduction to today's discussion, and we have a wonderful panel of distinguished speakers here today to take us through this conversation. So we all know that privatization continues the key threat to public services and its workers, and we've already discussed how we can stop it in an excellent panel that took place during the pre-Congress days. But if we can and must continue to stop privatization and outsourcing, as public service unions, we can and we must also be bolder. And we must reverse them by reclaiming public services so that they can work in the public interest, not for profit. So we will also hear from this panel that the return of privatized services, assets, and workers into public ownership and management is not only possible, but it is also happening as a global trend. And this trend is primarily taking place at a subnational level. That means at a municipal, at a provincial, at a regional, or at a state level, if we're talking about federal countries. Now, civic and civil society organizations, some local governments, and of course some trade unions have been mobilizing to reverse privatization and bring our vital services such as water, energy, health, care, education and waste, and their infrastructures back into public hands, and their workers into direct, stable, and decent employment. And I think that the COVID pandemic and the multi-crisis we're living through have actually emboldened our collective demand for public investment in public services and for running them in a common base interest. Now, trade unions are often key actors in the campaigns to bring services from the private back into the public domain. And why? Not only because they can play a pivotal role in remunicipalization processes, but because they are also a progressive social force entrenched in the community, but also a collective actor entrenched in the service itself, which is going to transition and be returned. Now, PSI has noticed early on that trade unions are frequently involved in these processes, and our collective experience on that is actually growing. Many of our unions are actually leading proactive campaigns on public service remunicipalization, and since 2017, PSI has stepped up its work and facilitated collective union learning in this field. And among the many campaigns that are currently active, we can mention, and we'll hear about more of those from our panelists, Unison's bringing services back in home in the UK, Force's More Power to You in Ireland, the United Services Union Council Services by Council Workers in Australia, and in France, a very strong campaign to renationalize comprehensively the public energy utility, and that's called For Public Energy. So now we have started, after all this work, to get remunicipalization acknowledged as public policy in some UN documents, such as the UN World Cities Report in 2022, but also in some policy papers of our employers in local government, the United Cities and Local Government, the UCLG, whose General Secretary spoke yesterday in another panel. And we must keep momentum and get more PSI unions engaged in this process. And this is exactly what we'll be looking at now with a panel of distinguished speakers I'm very honored and excited to introduce to you. So I will introduce each of them at a time, and then I'll give them the floor. Before I do so, Congress, you will have the opportunity to ask a question to the panel through the Congress app that you should be already familiar with. And that function is now open. So if you want to start asking questions, go ahead. Time permitting, we'll take a few of those. If not, we will, in any case, compile them for future reference. And I will now turn to our speakers. And I would like to start with Professor Andrew Cumbers, who's just next to me. Andy, if I may, you're Professor of Political Economy at the University of Glasgow. You've authored many books on the democratic ownership of the economy and on public services. And you've been a main contributor to the manifesto of the UK Labour Party in 2017. You also lead the global remunicipalization research that received a grant by the European Research Council with PSI's policy and strong support. And you lead the team behind the only global deprivatization database in existence, and that's called Public Futures. So I asked Professor Congress to tell Congress what is the current state of remunicipalization and deprivatization worldwide, and how can PSI affiliates get involved? So over to you, Andy, please.
Thank you, Daria. Okay, this should be a PowerPoint somewhere here. Am I pointing at the right thing? Do I need to be at the left?
All right. Yeah, can the tech team please put up the presentation of Professor Congress?
I'll go to the left.
Yeah, well.
Okay, I'll start anyway, Daria,
Yes,
yeah,
please.
because we're short of time. So thanks very much for inviting me here today. It's great to be here with so many trade union comrades and to see all the excellent work that people are doing around the world in this great global trade union network. As Daria said, I'm Professor of Political Economy at the University of Glasgow. I specialise in researching economic democracy, which isn't a very easy thing to research given the context of the contemporary global economy. But in the last 15 years or so, in particular, I've been looking at and working and researching with trade unions, activists, and other people around the world on the whole topic of democratic public ownership and how we do that, how we move towards a much more democratic economy. Owning our public services and controlling them is an important element of that. So I've been working, as Daria said, with the Labour Party a little bit during the period between 2017 to 2019 to actually rethink what democratic public ownership might be in the context of the 21st century and the very changing conditions of the global economy that we find ourselves in today. I'm also working very actively with trade unions, particularly PSI, and some of their campaigns as well. And I think one of the things I would stress at the start today is that when I talk about public ownership, I'm also interested in really learning lessons of past failures of public ownership, in particular moving beyond very top-down, state-driven models of ownership that had very little connection to workers and citizens, and they had very little involvement in engaging with making them work. Great, the PowerPoint seems to be working now. Now, since 2019, I've been working on a European Research Council-funded project investigating a really fascinating trend for cities and regions around the world, as Daria's already mentioned, to deprivatize public services, but also not just taking things back into public ownership, but actually creating new forms of public ownership. And this is a trend that's called remunicipalization. Doesn't get any easier to say the number of times you say it, but it's a fascinating process, and hopefully we'll discuss that quite thoroughly today. Now, in the brief time I have here today, I want to talk about two things, really. First of all, I'm going to talk about this trend of deprivatization or remunicipalization that's going on around the world. As Daria mentioned, it's getting the attention of critical public policy bodies, particularly the UN, and I think that's a really important moment for us to think about and capitalize on, because it is a policy solution to many of the problems that we face around the world, particularly with climate change. But again, as Daria has already alluded to, the COVID pandemic taught us about the value of locally owned and controlled, integrated public services, and many of the really bad problems that came out of the pandemic were often down to some of the failings of privatization to actually deliver quick, effective services for people in a moment of public emergency. So I think we're all aware, really, of the importance of locally integrated and owned public services. So that's the first thing I want to talk about today, is really to focus on the trend. The second thing I want to do is to talk about this public futures database that we've created with the help of PSI, but also with our partners, the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam, which has been a fascinating project for me to be involved in, and a really heartwarming project where the database is beginning to really catalog global cases of deprivatization as they happen, and also trying to develop something more than a database, a toolkit for us to actually use the evidence and information that's in there to really mobilize both against privatization but also in favor of the alternative. Okay, so if I first of all sort of dwell very briefly, and this is a 6-year project, and I've got about 6 minutes, I think, to talk about it. So if people, I'm here all day if people want to come and talk to me about it or talk in more depth later on. Now, since 2000, there's been this increasing trend around the world to deprivatize public services. In our work, and also with the work with TNI, we've identified about 1,700 cases across a diverse range of sectors: water, energy, transport, various local government insourcing departments, including cleaning, security, waste, education services, to name only a few. We've catalogued about 115 different types of activities in our database that have been brought back into public ownership in the last 20 or so years. Now, this is a global trend. It's happening on every continent. It's happening across 75 countries, so it's widespread. It's a real global phenomenon that's happening, but it's often happening below the surface, below the radar of national public attention. This is why it's important that we shout about it today. I think it's fair to say that of the cases that we've catalogued, we're probably underestimating what's going on, and I think the true figure of cases is probably much higher. I heard about a new case just this morning, for example. So I guess the big question is, why is this happening? Overwhelmingly, it's because privatization fails. It fails to deliver on its promises, on cost, efficiency, modernization, and investment. Doesn't matter about the sector you're talking about or the country you're talking about, there are these common problems with privatization around the world. And I think while there are some very interesting campaigns and movements that are developed around bringing things back into public ownership, what is quite interesting is that a lot of the deprivatizations that we catalogue in the database are often undertaken very quietly, behind the scenes, very often by the same conservative or centrist politicians, and sometimes social democrat politicians, that privatize the services in the first place, which I think is very interesting. As I've already said, this trend is referred to as remunicipalization, because although there are cases of deprivatization at the national level, the vast majority of these cases are happening at the local or municipal level or undertaken by local or regional governments. And what we're also seeing, really interestingly, with some of the cases we're cataloguing is some really interesting hybrid cases of shared ownership between local public authorities and communities, or even trade unions in some cases. Now, if we look at it by sector, I think some of the most it's fair to say that there are concentrations in particular sectors. Water and energy have dominated, as you can see from the slide. Water and energy have tended to dominate so far because these are the sectors that often were basically privatized the furthest in different countries around the world. But it's also here that the biggest failings of failed investment, failed modernization have become more and more apparent to service users, and there's often been a kind of uproar against the effects of privatization, and therefore momentum is built to take things back into public ownership. In the energy sector, another added factor has been the failure of private corporations to invest sufficiently in moving away from carbon-based fuels to renewables. And this has been responsible for one of the biggest shifts towards remunicipalization anywhere in the world, in Germany, where big cities such as Hamburg and Berlin, as well as smaller towns and rural areas, have taken electricity grids back into public ownership and are now producing renewable energy themselves. So that's been a really, really fascinating trend. We also see remunicipalization happening in some of the newer digital economy sectors. One of the interesting things we've picked up with the database and research is a growing movement for broadband, publicly owned local broadband in the US, where the big private corporates just haven't invested in decent internet services or even basic internet services for many of their citizens, particularly in rural and the poorer parts of cities. So there's a fascinating trend for new municipally owned broadband companies to be set up right across the US. Geographically, I think it's fair to say that remunicipalization so far has been concentrated in Europe and North America, because once again, these are the continents where privatization was applied most intensively in the 1990s. Within this, if you look at the map, we can drill down into particular countries, particular parts of continents where there are particular concentrations of deprivatization activity. Germany, as I've already alluded to, with its energy politics, has been the epicenter, really, of the global trend. Something like a third of all cases of remunicipalization have happened in Germany, and most of those are in the energy sector. We also see France being an interesting epicenter, particularly in the water industry, where there's been a massive pushback against some of the corrupt and untransparent practices of private sector operators, with some really interesting mobilizations going on locally in favor of public ownership. And the US is a surprising center as well. To many people in this room, it'll come as quite some big news that the US is actually the sort of free market capital of the world, is the place where we see a lot of remunicipalization, a lot of deprivatization going on. In the water sector, cities as diverse as New York, Houston, and Atlanta have taken privatized water services back into public hands in the last decade. But there are also, and our research is following this, there are also some really interesting campaigns ongoing at the moment to take energy back into public ownership. New York State has just passed an act to use public funding to build publicly owned renewables, creating in the process a new generation of green jobs with what campaigners have called ironclad prevailing wage agreements that will source locally wherever possible. Another fascinating case, and I've got a researcher going over to the US to follow this in the next few weeks. Another really interesting case is in the state of Maine, where there's a big campaign at the moment to take the energy grid back into local public hands and away from the private operator, the Spanish company Iberdrola. There's a referendum happening there, so direct democracy, referendum giving the citizens the choice about whether they deprivatize or not. And I think what's fascinating about the Maine case is that it's really a case that cuts across political boundaries. Republican and Democrat local voters are backing a local campaign for public ownership. The US is also seeing a really interesting trend. There's a whole national movement to create public banks. California has passed legislation to allow this to happen, and New York is also trying to push ahead with a campaign to create publicly owned banks that can actually invest locally in community schemes. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, our research into these issues has resulted in the creation of this massive public futures database, which wouldn't have been possible without the activism of local trade union members around the world and the fantastic work of the Transnational Institute based in Amsterdam that began to gather data about the cases. So we've created this huge database. And I think it's fair to say that this is a sort of product of democratic ownership in its own sense, because it's a crowdsourced database. It's only as good as the information we get from the grassroots. And it's really able to catalog what's going on around the world and use these cases in our own campaigns and resources. So we're extremely proud of this database, which is the most accessible and unique source of information about what's going on in the deprivatization process. Many of as Daria mentioned, many of the leading organizations around the world are beginning to take note of this process that's going on and actually beginning to think, well, actually, this is a critical public policy solution to our problems. Unfortunately, many other organizations like the OECD, the World Bank, the European Commission are carrying on with the neoliberal agenda, pretending that this sort of thing isn't happening at all. It doesn't fit with their dominant narrative about privatization and marketization. And I think as part of that narrative, they're also ignoring some of the failings of privatization and continuing to push it in different parts of the world. But what we can say with this database and what we can say with the work we're doing is it's evidence that there is an alternative out there, to contradict Margaret Thatcher's famous statement a few decades ago. And I think this database is an effective tool in getting the idea of public ownership and actually democratic public ownership back out there onto the agenda. The final thing I say today is it is a grassroots initiative. It's ultimately dependent and can only work with the support of people around the world and our local unions and members. So I'd finish today by saying and asking everybody who's here in this room, if they can, to contribute new cases and new information to us, to this database, so that we can enhance and really improve the coverage and quality of information that we have. This is essential if we're to continue the fight against privatization, and marketization of public services. It's essential in the campaigning for better jobs, better conditions, better services, and perhaps most importantly, better participation and engagement of workers and citizens in the running of public services. So we think the Public Futures Database is an important tool in doing that. It will help us to combat dominant, elite, and very often just wrong narratives about public services that urgently need attention. So I'll leave it there today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. And I think it's very important what you said on the map, the fact that there seems to be an overwhelming occurrence of this phenomenon in Western countries. But the problem is also the news bias, the information bias. We do not have enough information about the taking back of services, including of workers, the insourcing in the Global South. So we urgently need your help to actually show that this is not just a supposedly rich country phenomenon, but to show precisely these organizations which are still so biased towards the neoliberal agenda, the OECD, the World Bank, which continue to have a major influence on our countries, on our public services, and on our working conditions and communities, that actually there's an overwhelming opportunity to seize, and remunicipalization is occurring much more often than they think or that they would like to think. And I think it's very important what you also showed, Andy, that there's an expanding perimeter, realm for public services. We often think of public services as water, utilities, health, but have you seen on the screen there was food, and just talked about banks, and I think that with COVID, we've realized that there's more that we need to fall under public services. Certainly, for example, housing, which is a human basic need. So thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm very pleased to move to Canada now with our speakers who are actually going to tell us from the trade union point of view what they are doing in their own country, in their own communities, as trade unions to take services back in-house. It's my pleasure to introduce Fred Hahn, who is the Vice President for the State of Ontario of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE. CUPE is Canada's largest union. You're also the president of the Union's Ontario Provincial Section, and you're vice president of the Ontario Federation of Labour. You've been in CUPE since '91. You have a social worker background. You've been supporting persons with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And you've advocated for quality public services all your life. And you're Ontario's first openly LGBT plus labor leader. So we want to commend you for that. Working to build an inclusive trade union movement. So welcome, Fred. So now, Fred, CUPE has been one of the pioneers, I think, among our public service unions to develop a systematic trade union strategy, not only to resist the privatization, but also to proactively identify targets to bring back in-house. You use research, education, but also pro-public collective bargaining. And these are recurrent features in CUPE's successful campaigns. For example, fixed long-term care, which is one of your recent campaigns. And you also use strategically public procurement and collective bargaining to lock public ownership in. So my question to you is, how has that bold and proactive stance developed in your trade union? And how does it articulate between the CUPE national office and your locals? Because that's another important thing we'd like to learn from you. Over to you, please.
Thanks so much, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, sisters, brothers, comrades. It is enormously, I'm proud to be here to talk about our union. We have 715,000 members across Canada in every part of the country, and it has been for some time part of our culture to talk about the importance of public services. Like all of you, in Canada, public services have been under attack literally since the 1980s with the introduction of neoliberal governments and thinking. And in that entire time, we've been trying to build capacity, not only to understand why this is wrong for us, for our members, and also for our communities, but also how to fight it successfully and how to bring services back in-house. We've been refining, I think, over these years, our methods. And I wanted to share a couple of examples that are more recent, and then talk a little bit about the different ways in which, at the local level, in municipalities, in towns and cities, the work is happening. It is also happening on sort of a provincial level, and we're also aiming at the federal government on a national level to try to make change to bring services back in-house. COVID-19 had many different impacts, but for some local governments, many of the jobs that our members performed based on the restrictions that our government put in place because of the pandemic meant that people weren't able to do their work. In some places, there's an example in the middle of Canada, of sort of a medium-sized city. The council decided to lay off, end the work of 350 full-time workers and some 450 casual or seasonal workers, claiming that there was no ability for them to be able to continue to do their jobs. And of course, this started a conversation about the potential of contracting out these jobs. But our local union on the ground worked with others and with people in the community to be able to, talk directly to councillors and mount a campaign. They were able to, negotiate a redeployment protocol so that many of these people who would have otherwise been unemployed were able to come back to do different jobs and to help during the pandemic. And ultimately, any of the initial proposals to contract out this work were ended because of the work that our members did in sort of, doing completely other jobs than they were ever trained for or ever hired for in the midst of a pandemic. It reminded communities of the commitment that public sector workers have to their communities in the midst of a crisis. There are ongoing examples where infrastructure in communities needs to be replaced, and ongoing examples where corporations roll into town with millions of dollars to say, hey, we can fund your new water treatment plant, we can build your new systems. And this happens even in relatively small communities. There's an example in the province that I come from, a relatively small community. And because of the years of cutbacks from transfer payments from provinces and federal government to municipal or local governments, many local governments feel that they simply don't have the capacity, the financial capacity to fix or renew their infrastructure. But in this example, in a relatively small community, just in 2020, our members worked with people in the community. They formed what they called a Water Watch Committee that really helped people in that community to be reminded water is essential to life. It should never be a commodity that is for sale. It should never be something on which people make profit. They also worked with national organizations and others, even in this relatively small community. And in the end, they were able to preserve all of their water and wastewater. And this new facility is, in fact, a public facility run by public sector workers. Also, during the pandemic, I'll just speak a little bit about long-term care. In Canada, of all of the folks in our country who died as a result of COVID-19, 4 out of every 5 deaths were seniors and people who worked in long-term care facilities. The vast majority of those cases were in private for-profit facilities. In Canada, we have sort of three models of delivery of long-term care. There are corporate, private for-profit facilities. There are not-for-profits. Sometimes these are charitable homes. And then there are municipally run long-term care homes. Private for-profit homes had twice the number of cases and twice the number of deaths due to COVID-19 than not-for-profits, and 4 times the number of cases and deaths as municipal homes. It's because the quality of care in municipal homes is simply better and better supported. We have used this reality to remind communities of the importance of bringing this work back in-house. Daria mentioned that we have actually started a national campaign called Fix Long-Term Care. This is aimed at our federal government. In Canada, we have the Canada Health Act, which articulates that certain parts of the healthcare system must be public and must be not-for-profit. And our aim is to have the Canada Health Act amended to ensure that seniors' care, that our parents and grandparents, the people who built our communities, are no longer seen as centers of profit for corporations. And so we're aiming at the federal level there while we're working at the community level as well.
Great.
And I'll quickly say that in our union, we've developed many resources to help our locals make these arguments on the ground about bringing services back in-house. In fact, we had a report called Back in-House in 2016. This one report articulates 15 different examples, literally from every part of Canada, where services like sidewalk maintenance, water and wastewater, snow removal, a big deal in Canada, solid waste, recreation, community recreation, food provision. There are examples in this one piece of research of all of these services being brought back in-house. We did that with the Columbia Institute, a sort of a third party, and it was really quite important to have that third party validation to the work our members were doing on the ground. We developed a guide called Asking the Right Questions, a guide for municipalities considering PPPs, or P3s as we call them in Canada. And this has been an incredibly useful guide for local politicians who often have no idea. They're elected, they have no idea, and they're just told there's no money. And they got to figure this out. And so this guide, this tool, has been quite important. And we've developed, as Daria said, actual resources for bargaining tables so that locals who are bargaining with employers can actually bargain contract language to help to prevent contracting out and privatization. I'll quickly just mention that we're also working hard to try to talk about public banking. In Canada, the federal government introduced what they called the Federal Infrastructure Bank in 2017. This was ostensibly supposed to be a resource to make low-cost loans available to municipalities to update their infrastructure, but in fact, what happened with this infrastructure bank is that it was sort of taken over by the private sector. And once the private sector became involved, all of those resources were contingent upon any of these projects being PPPs. And so we've been working to try to prevent municipalities from accessing these resources. In fact, much of the resources initially made available in this bank have not been accessed because people realize the problem there. And so what we're trying to do is actually institute a real public bank that can be used for the good of communities across the country. I'll just quickly say it, I know I've taken a bit of time, but I wanted to reinforce that alongside research and alongside working with communities, one of the most essential things that has led to success in our union is really working with our members, talking to our members who do the work, making sure that local unions that represent municipal workers that do a series of different kinds of jobs, that the local executive actually represents all of those different departments so people can talk with one another and actually strategize together, making sure that we center our members in this work, because our members not only deliver this service, it isn't just about their jobs, it's about their families, it's about the communities they live in, it's about their futures. That's what's led to our success. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fred. I will not transition long, but I just want to emphasize how important education and awareness raising is in these successful strategies that QP has pioneered, and the role of the union in educating your local elected government officials who come into office. As you said, they are told they have no money, and then they have to do quite amazing jobs with no training, and whereas unions and the workers who've been there for and will be there after them know best. So I will now go directly to the next speaker. So we're going to Australia now. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you someone who doesn't really need an introduction. That's Maddie Northam, the Australian Capital Territory Regional Secretary for the Community and Public Sector Union, CPSU. So, Maddie, I will skip some of the content of your bio, but I will certainly want to say that you're a PSI Executive Board Youth Titular, and that you've used and continues to use your role to push for the greater inclusion of young workers in GUFs, Global Trade Union Federations, but also in the ITUC. And we need much of that. So I asked Maddie to talk about the quite systemic shift that Australia has recently lived, because in 2022 you had an election where Labour won after 20 years of neoliberal governments with Labour leader Anthony Albanese. And Australian unions have played a major role in this victory, including with your active role on the Australian People's Inquiry on Privatization, which issued a report that demonstrated how privatization had failed the Australian people over such a long time. And the role of trade unions have been absolutely critical also in the passing of legislation to insource and to ensure that you have to run a test that you can provide a service in-house first before you put it out for tendering. And so I would like to ask you, Maddie, to tell us about this came into being. What was the trade union strategy from your perspective, and how is it going with the insourcing framework? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Daria. And hello again, everyone. To start with, I thought I would acknowledge the lands that I'm from, the Ngunnawal land in Canberra, and acknowledge their elders past and present. So, as Daria mentioned, we have had a change of government at the national level, which is very exciting and was delivered by trade unions for trade union members. And we've already seen really great outcomes coming through for our members, again, at that national level, with major industrial relations reform that unions have been pushing for many years now, including things that are coming up, like same job, same pay. Which is what it sounds like. In the example of our union, I suppose, it would be it's a public servant getting paid one wage, and if they, for some reason, want to have someone who's labour hire, not a public servant, they would have to be paid the same wage as well. So making it a deterrent to outsource. But I wanted to focus on the area that I personally look after within the union, which is the ACT government. Now, Canberra is the capital of Australia, and we have a regional government of around 20-something thousand staff who fulfil a range of functions. So in Australia, we have, in most areas, local councils. In Canberra, we don't. So we have one government that does it all. So we've got staff in our workforce that do everything from picking up the garbage all the way through to delivering health and education services. So in 2017, very much led by PSI, there was what's called the People's Inquiry into Privatisation in Australia. Now, this was a huge body of work where a group of leaders travelled around the country, listening to trade unions, but also to NGOs, to community groups, and to individuals, to hear their stories of privatisation. And what it found was pretty much across the board, privatisation sucks, right? Yeah, and we needed to start bringing things in house. So one of the recommendations of this report, which is, I think it's 117 pages, but I do recommend that you look through at least the recommendations page, that governments should take back control of failed privatisations. Now, within the CPSU, we undertook a bit of an internal review to see where we could best do this. Where could we trial the recommendations of the People's Inquiry into Privatisation? And we decided on the ACT government. Now, we did that for a few reasons. One, it's where the CPSU has the most political power in any state or territory around the country, because we're the largest affiliated trade union to the Labor Party, which is the party of government. That leads me to my second piece, which is the Labor Party had been in government for over 20 years in the ACT. They still are. So we weren't dealing with a new government who was who could potentially be worried about this sort of work electorally. In 2019, we started working with our members to lobby the Labor Party in the lead up to a territory election. Now, that's the critical part here. The government just wasn't going to do this because we said so. We had to have leverage, and our leverage was our members vote, our members work for you, and where their vote goes will be dependent on what you say in regards to insourcing. So our members, they wrote letters, they went and met with politicians, and they determined that they would only campaign for the Labor Party to win back government if they made a commitment to insourcing work and to protecting public service jobs, so a commitment not to outsource anything further. So we went back and forth with the Labor Party, as you can imagine, and then we got the commitment. So our members campaigned for Labor government and were successful. So as always, it's union members and community members that are delivering these outcomes. It's not the politicians, they're reacting to pressure. So they formed government with the Greens Party, and they actually wrote into their parliamentary government agreement that they will legislate to prevent outsourcing or privatisation of public sector jobs. Now, this meant we had a piece of paper we could hold on to, their commitment that they would do this. So then, over the following few years, we worked closely with the government and our members, of course, to deliver something that is now called the Insourcing Framework in ACT government. It has had a long journey to get here since 2020, because these things take a lot of negotiation, working through many drafts. But essentially, we now have a document that when a new contract comes up for providing a public service in the ACT, that they have to go through a process if they're thinking about outsourcing it. They have to go through a process of identifying why they want to do that. Is there a public good to that? Reviewing it, and then coming up with a decision. Now, the part of this here is a bit tricky. The politicians are not bound to follow the outcome of this process. So in some ways, that's bad, because if we go through a process that finds that we should keep this service in-house or bring this in-house, they don't have to listen. but also if the bureaucrats find that it shouldn't be brought in-house, politicians can make the decision to bring it in-house anyway, make a political decision. So I suppose this is something that our members have worked towards for a long time, and we're very much led by our members. So there is no way that we can keep across every single contract in the public service. It's not possible. So we rely on our members to come to us and say, hey, look what they're doing here. And then we go through a process with the government, through that process I outlined earlier. So there's a few things to consider. It's only contracts worth over $200,000 or more. That it doesn't relate to an existing outsourcing arrangement to a non-profit organisation or involve a vulnerable community group. And the example of that in Australia would be services that are delivered by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. And we're not interested in getting into that space anyway. That community delivers best for themselves. So we've already had a few wins with this framework, and there is a lot more to come. So they've started small. Our members identified an area of our hospital, the fetal medicine unit, that was going to be outsourced, and they campaigned hard. They lobbied the minister. They went to the media. They got us all the information, and they won. And now that's only a small area. We've also won the keeping in-house of an eating disorder clinic that the government was considering outsourcing. A huge win. It wasn't by our union, but by another union, was the insourcing of school cleaners. So all our public school cleaners are now public servants, where they used to be contracted out. And then a very huge recent win, which didn't technically go through our framework, but has massive implications for our region, is the insourcing of a major Catholic hospital in Canberra. The government made a decision, and I would say in the context of us having done all this work around insourcing, they made a decision to bring that in-house. So they've gone from Catholic Little Company of Mary ownership back to public hands, which was really, really exciting. Now, finally, I just wanted to mention, because many of you in this room were there, we had an online consultation, a global consultation on this framework, where the Minister for Industrial Relations responsible for this and the bureaucrats who are doing the policy work came and listened to PSI affiliates and actually took your feedback on board. So I wanted to say thank you to all of you, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Wow. So you see, I hope Maddie's presentation actually gives you confidence and trust that collectively we can turn things around. Can you imagine passing a piece of legislation which obliges your government, your local government, or perhaps your state government, and why not your federal government or your central government, to run this test and make sure and stop it, prevent it from outsourcing and procuring or privatizing services? That's great, and I hope we can continue that conversation and know how things are going. But now we are going to another country, and I'm therefore going to switch to Spanish.
Because we're now going to Costa Rica. It is an enormous pleasure for me to introduce Rebecca Céspedes Alvaro, the Gender Secretary of the National Association of Public Employees of Costa Rica. We can see that you all know her. She's, I think, indeed very well known. Rebecca has been working for more than 20 years in the Coyutea municipality in the province of San Jose, Department 8. Furthermore, you in charge of the Human Rights Secretariat of the Executive of the Confederation of Municipal Workers of the Americas, the CONTRAM. Welcome, Rebecca. Rebecca, now, you carried out a big struggle in the municipality of San Jose to obtain the remunicipalization of the solid waste collection, which had been outsourced to a private American company. Could you tell us a little bit about this struggle and what strategies you used and what alliances you set up to overcome the different obstacles? Rebecca, the floor is now yours. Thank you very much to you all. I would like to thank all Congress for listening to. I'm very proud of be a trade union representative from a country where everybody thinks is a paradise, that we don't have any problems, but we have just the same problems as elsewhere in the world. As Daria was explaining, as of 2009 in Costa Rica, there was an emergency declaration for the collection of solid waste. So there was a campaign with the leaders of the time, and solid waste collection was privatized, and it began in the capital, San Jose, in 2009. We started talking about this in January, and 2 months later, the public service was fully privatized, which left with no employment many workers. And we realized this because this was something that was expanding throughout the country, both in the rural areas and the rest of the capital. That is why, after 2 months, our trade union started to fight against this privatization. And how? Well, our most alliance were the communities, because they began to be told that they were going to have better service, that waste collection was going to be more frequent, and they were not going to be paying as much. Well, they really drew up a very rosy picture of all this, but the communities realized this, and the trade unions too, and we alerted the communities about this because they realized that the services were becoming very deficient. And the high taxes that were being levied too worried the community. So our main allies were the communities. So we started working with them with workshops. We visited the different homes, door after door. That's what the trade union did, so that they would start getting involved with us for big strikes at capital level. It was an experience because the trade unions saw us as we were going to seen as we were only going to be fighting so that for an increase in salary, and this experience was successful to such an extent that in 2010 the company said we can no longer maintain our workforce. So the American company decided to only keep the collection trucks. Now, despite the struggles we have been carrying out, well, I don't really have very much time to tell you how we expanded this throughout the country. The insourcing was expanded throughout the country. The company in the San Jose municipality only has we have recovered the job for all employees which had been expelled with the privatization, and in the same municipality realized it was better to buy new collection trucks than to continue with the American company. So as of 2024, this service will be fully public in the municipality. Throughout this process, for the collection of solid waste, 2 public municipalities allied with us to set up a company for the collection of waste, solid waste. And this did alert us. And so what we did was just to stop the privatization of such services in the 12 municipalities that had become allies. This, for us, was an incredible event. Because it was incredible to hear people say, we don't want to pay more for a very poor service. So we continued in our work, and the different municipalities and parishes who were on the road to privatization, we turned things round and there was insourcing again. And in the coastal province of Costa Rica, things changed, and in the province of Limón as well, where privatization was around the corner, but we did accompany the people in their struggle, and we managed to bring back the public workers who had been sent away. Thank you very much. I would like to say that thanks to the preparation of this panel, I discovered, talking with Rebecca, I discovered that this had happened. So that is why we sent them to the Public Futures Workshop. So we're going to have Rebecca with us. I think it's very important to highlight the role of trade unions as triggers for the communities, and how important their alliance as users was. Because, of course, we're trade unions and we are community members and we're users. We, in fact, wear different hats, and I think we have to stress this. And as we don't have very much more time, we do have an incredible case here in the UK. So I'm going to go back to English. I do apologize.
Transition back to English because we've got a last but great speaker and great representative of a local government services union. I'm very pleased to introduce to Congress Claire Keogh, who is the Union's national officer for local authorities, representing local government workers across the UK, including local and regional government, school support staff, and police staff. So, Claire, you've been a full Unite official for 5 years. You've organized many strikes and insourcing campaigns, including with low-paid civil aviation and local authority workers, and you now lead Unite sector strategy for insourcing in local government contracts. So, Claire, Unite is taking on to local councils and government to reclaim local government services for the people and for workers. So, and this strategy is part and parcel of Unite's program of winning pay jobs and conditions. So can you tell us more about your campaigns? How do you choose your targets? How do you empower your members and local leaders also to win those jobs and conditions through the transition? Over to you.
Thank you, Daria. Good morning, everyone. It's absolutely amazing to be here, and I'm very proud to be on such an esteemed panel. I'll very quickly introduce my union, Unite, first of all. We are the largest general union in the UK. We have 1.2 million members, and we organise across every single sector of our economy. And our position that public services should be run only for the public good, that stretches across all of those sectors that we organise in. For example, at the moment, we are running a nationwide campaign to fully renationalise our energy services. And we've undertaken some research which showed that last year alone, UK residents would have saved £45 billion if energy was in public hands. But of course, my sector is local government, like my colleagues on the panel. And insourcing and remunicipalisation, I hate saying that too, that is a key priority for our reps and members in local government. And our broader sector strategy as well is about building our members' power, worker power, through disputes and by taking strike action. But actually our position is that those two priorities go hand in hand. Privatisation and outsourcing in the UK has been forced onto local councils through legislation for the last 40 years, and it's also been the political consensus throughout that time as well, despite, as Andy mentioned earlier, there being absolutely no evidence to support the assertion that private companies provide better services. But having said that, let's also be clear that privatisation has worked because it has set out what it intended to do in breaking up public services, breaking up trade union recognition agreements, undermining our bargaining power, in turn reducing pay and conditions, devolving blame away from politicians, and above all else, it's put public money into private pockets. So it's actually working quite well when you think about it. But we try to use this knowledge in Unite and build that firmly into our industrial strategy and our workplace organising. We don't want to only be reactive or defensive, as Daria was talking about earlier. And equally, we don't want to wait for more sympathetic politicians to come along, because while I'm very glad to hear that has worked elsewhere, in the UK, you could be waiting quite a long time. If you look, for example, at how our left-wing Labour leadership was treated between 2015 and 2019. So we don't want to just wait around for that to happen either. What we want to do is be proactive and give our reps and members the tools that they need to bring their own privatised workplaces back into public hands. So we developed an activist guide, a sort of toolkit. It's quite short, it's very accessible. It's called Better Public Services, and it maps out the steps of a campaign that our reps can build themselves, and it gives them strategies that they can use to bring their service back in-house. So the document provides arguments for why truly public services are better. You know, it's cheaper, the services are of better quality, it's more accountable, etc. And it also gives examples of campaigning insourcing wins as well, to give reps and members the confidence that it can happen, it does happen. It sets out policies that we can push local councils to adopt, like insourcing first policies, so that running services in-house is always the default. And actually, it sets out how we can try and use the law to our advantage. The law in the UK generally isn't very favourable to trade unions, but we can try and convince councils to break contracts with providers early if we can show they're not meeting their targets, they're not delivering the service, or perhaps something else has happened that frustrates the contract. In addition to the guide, we can also undertake in-depth research for our reps if they need it. So we can look at the finances of these companies. We can look at how they operate in different parts of the UK or around the world, and give the reps briefings that they can then use not only in their workplaces, but with their local decision makers as well, saying, look, this is what this company does to its workers. This is what it does to public services where it operates. Is this really what you want in your own local area? And we also run reps combine meetings. So I think I've heard it referred to by other colleagues over the last couple of days as like network meetings, but it's basically where you bring reps together from different parts of the country, maybe with different employers, but they do the same job, and they talk to each other and they compare and they share ideas and hopefully inspire each other. And we have seen that work, for example, with refuse disputes, and it has a knock-on effect. But underlining all of that strategy, and the document sets this out as well, we are absolutely clear that we cannot be successful in these kind of campaigns if we are not organised. If we do not have structures in place, union structures in place in the workplace, if we don't have our leaders and our reps identified, if the workforce isn't united, and also if they're not prepared to take action, if they're not prepared to go out and strike, then it's going to be very difficult to win. So I will give a couple of examples, but before I do that, I'll very quickly just touch upon a few hurdles that you come across with these kind of campaigns. So number one, it might sound like I'm stating the obvious, but actually we don't always say it in settings like this, because for good reason we always want to sound positive. But actually it's really, really difficult to do this. It is not easy to organise campaigns. It is not easy to convince politicians to bring services back in-house. It takes time. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes organisation. And if we're honest, I think the majority of these campaigns will take place over a few years, over several years. And you probably are going to want to have smaller wins along the way to build confidence, but maintaining that momentum for a long period of time, it is a very difficult thing to do, you know, and we have to acknowledge that from the outset. Also in the UK, and I'm sure this is true elsewhere as well, council finances are in a dire state. We're in a crisis after 13 years of austerity. And even though we can demonstrate that running services in-house is cheaper in the long run, councils might be very nervous about spending the money up front to bring a service back in. They might only be thinking about short-term decisions, maybe even to get them to the next election cycle. So that can be difficult to overcome as well. And also that fragmentation and loss of union recognition that I mentioned earlier, that can make things very difficult for us too. And one example I always use for this is a London borough that I was representing split its housing maintenance department into 4. It brought one small section of it back in-house and then split the other 3 out to 3 different private contractors, which must have been an administrative nightmare for them. I don't know why they wanted to do that, but as you can imagine for us, that was very difficult because those workers had been all in the same workplace. All of a sudden, they had different employers and different workplaces, and it was very difficult to keep them together. But I'll quickly, I know we are tight on time, I'll just give a couple of examples of the kind of campaigns we've been running. Another one that I was involved in, and I'm sorry I'm talking about London campaigns, but that is where I've been based. The London Borough of Ealing parking services, so they manage traffic throughout the borough. They were actually inspired by another parking services win we'd had in London in the London Borough of Hackney that was fully brought back in-house a couple of years ago. But in Ealing, the contract had been outsourced a number of years ago, much to the disappointment of the members and reps working there. And Serco took over the contract in 2019, and we had problems right away. Within a few months, we were balloting for strike action because they were looking to change everyone's contract, cut a number of jobs, streamline the service, but in turn increase the number of hours that the ones who were left were working. So we took strike action, and it was successful, and Serco weren't able to implement those changes. But it was at that point that the reps and myself and the members, we were talking about a longer-term insourcing campaign to finally get this contract back in-house. And then a bit later on in 2021, we had another opportunity for a dispute because Serco, having not been able to implement those changes, I don't know why they did this, but they attempted to pay off our union reps and a number of our members, offer them settlement agreements to leave. And fortunately, we have very principled reps, and you can imagine how that went. And we actually launched a new dispute, and our members were out on strike on and off for 3 months this time. And we actually used the public mood at the time as well, because at this time in the UK, hundreds of millions of pounds had been wasted on a track and trace system during COVID that didn't work, and Serco were operating it. So the public wasn't a big fan of Serco at the time. And so we used that, called our campaign Sack Serco. And that was on the leaflets that we were handing out to members of the public as well when we were on the picket lines. And we built up so much political pressure, as well as financial losses for the council during that lengthy strike, that the settlement of that strike with the council was, in a year's time, when you start the re-tendering process of this contract, make sure Unite is at the table from day one. And they stuck to it, and they approached us. And when the deputy council leader called me, I said, glad you called. We are about to ballot them again for strike action for a 3rd time. But we were part of that process, and we put together a report that went to the full council meeting. We were invited to attend and make our case. And as a result, Serco actually lost that contract because of our intervention. Now, this wasn't a complete victory, because what the council did, because of the state of its finances and as a compromise position, they brought them into a wholly owned company, a new company that had been set up that the council owns. And this is actually another sort of hurdle we probably need to be aware of. We still see it as a victory because we have pulled the workers away from these giant corporations, and we will now be negotiating with the council. But nonetheless, we still don't see that as full insourcing. So the campaign will continue there. And just one more campaign that I will mention because it's so inspiring, and Andy and I were talking about it in the waiting room. It's not a local government campaign, it's actually a campaign, an NHS campaign. The St. Bart's facilities workers. So St Bart's is an NHS hospital trust in London. It covers a few London hospitals. And the facilities workers, so the cleaners, caterers, porters, security guards, they were all outsourced. And they earned 15% less than their NHS counterparts, their directly employed colleagues who they were working right next to in the same building. And they'd been organising for a long time, and in 2016, and I honestly didn't mean to pick on Serco today, it just so happens that this is another Serco campaign, but Serco won the contract in 2016, and in 2017, the workforce there had really had enough. Not only were they being underpaid, but they were working longer, harder hours. I think Serco was trying to take their tea breaks away from them, so they would have fewer breaks. And they took strike action in 2017. It was incredibly effective. I think we had 700-800 members out on strike at that time. And they won a substantial pay rise. But they kept up the momentum over the few years and throughout the pandemic. And then in 2022, across the London hospitals, they took 2 weeks of strike action this time, Unite members did. And as a result of that, the NHS Trust agreed that they would bring 1,800 outsourced workers into the NHS, and they're now on NHS pay and terms and conditions as well. So hopefully we can replicate more of that on that scale, because that was a landmark agreement for us. It was really a massive win. So to summarise, I'll just say we don't only need to be defensive when it comes to insourcing. We can very much be proactive. If we can identify targets where workers are maybe already getting organised, or we know we can get them organised, we can see the potential for those smaller wins along the way to keep up the momentum. If we know they're clearly getting shafted by their employer, but equally the local community is being let down by their employer as well, not delivering the service that they should do, then we can launch these campaigns ourselves. And as is the case, I always say, with any industrial issue, if we are militant and if we are prepared to fight, then that's when we can win. So, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That was, I think, an excellent conclusion to the panel, which showcases that insourcing, remunicipalization, and taking services back also has can have an industrial dimension, which is successful. We can organize, we can win conditions and jobs through insourcing. And thanks for those very, very complete and concrete examples. Colleagues, we've pretty much run out of our time, but I think you enjoyed as much as I did this amazing panel, which I think empowered you all. I looked at the questions that were pushed. There's perhaps one we can take because it requires a very snappy answer, perhaps 1 point. Someone is asking, what is the one thing you would like to tell Public Services Union to do to begin to be proactive and take public services and their workers back in-house? So just to conclude, really, I would start again from Andy. What would be that one thing you would tell unions to inspire and empower them to bring services back in-house?
Tricky question, and I'm not sure I can give you a snappy soundbite, but I think I'd pick up on what Claire said at the end there, go from the defensive onto the offensive, because actually in my debates around, when I've been talking to people about this topic, there's very few defenders of privatization out there anymore, because we've had 4 decades where people know it failed. And just a little anecdote, if I can. I was asked, when I was doing the work for the Labour Party, I was actually asked to talk at an Institute of Economic Affairs seminar. That was the Thatcherite neoliberal free market think tank, and they put up a guy, a young guy from the Social Market Foundation, to respond to me. And what did he say at the end? He said, "Actually, I agree with a lot of what Andy's saying here about privatization. It hasn't worked." But the only response he had is, "We need better regulation of privatization, and we need better consumers." And I was and actually that gave me a lot of heart, that event, because I thought, actually, yeah, we're winning the arguments. So let's go on the offensive and put forward the alternative case for better public services.
Thanks, Andrew. Fred, what would you say?
It's always difficult to pick one thing, but I think starting with your members, trusting that your members know how to bring this work back in-house, understand the value of doing that they are already connected to their communities through their church or their mosque, through their kids, sports league, whatever, in a variety of ways. And when you start with your members and you actually mobilize your members and you empower those workers, anything is possible.
Mm-hmm. Right, great. Maddie?
Identify somewhere that this can actually work, and like Fred just said, trust your members. Follow their lead. If you follow the members, you're always going to get it right.
All right. And Rebecca?
Dos cosas.
Two things. Alliances with the communities and the inhabitants is absolutely essential. And secondly, I think we have to aware the workers must do their work as best possible so that the community knows we're doing the best work possible.
Get organised. So expand a tiny bit. Think of it as an industrial issue, insourcing and remunicipalisation. Don't be afraid because it might look like a huge, giant thing to do. You can start small, as I said, get those smaller wins. Even if it takes a long time or you don't quite get that full win that you're looking for, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get better pay and terms and conditions along the way, right? So number one, identify those key issues in your workplace and start getting organised.
All right. Well, Congress, I hope you enjoy this great panel as much as I did. Let's give a great round of applause to these leaders. And please, let's start to be proactive and let us know about your insourcing and remunicipalization campaigns. Thank you.
Where there is solidarity, there is hope. Where there is hope, there is power. We are the public service workers who make society work. We're your nurses and carers looking out for your loved ones. We're the utility workers keeping your lights on and the water flowing. We're there for you in the good times and in moments of crisis. Public Services International is our global union federation, bringing together over 30 million workers and 700 unions from 154 countries. Through PSI, we lead the struggle for universal quality public services, social justice, and better frontline conditions. Yet for too long, we've been taken for granted. Understaffing left us overworked. Privatization and corporate tax dodging put private profits ahead of people. Our efforts to unionize were undermined, and we all paid the price for austerity and cuts. Now the COVID pandemic has pushed our services beyond the limit. We know we can't return to the same broken policies which made this crisis worse. That's why through PSI, we're developing pro-worker policies and research to tackle pandemics, reduce inequality, and address the climate crisis. We're growing the power of the working class worldwide through solidarity projects and organizing initiatives. We're mobilizing with social movements and allies to influence governments and shape the recovery for the many, not for the rich few. There's more than enough wealth in the world to provide universal, quality public services to everyone. It's time to turn the applause into action.
Fackliga vänner, kära fackliga systrar och
Union friends, dear sisters and brothers, I welcome you most warmly to session 14 of our Congress. A huge thanks to all of you for yesterday. It was a very strong and inspiring day we shared, and I think we managed to deal with a number of difficult matters. I'd also like to congratulate our new leaders, Danny and Britta. I'd like to congratulate them on the resounding vote they got from us. And of course, I would also like to thank Rosa and Dave for having brought us all the way to here. So I think they also deserve a good round of applause. My name is Veronica Magnusson. I have the pleasure of chairing our session today. As you can hear, I'm going to be speaking Swedish. That's my mother tongue. So I hope that's going to work smoothly. I'm European Vice Chair, and I'm also President of the Swedish Federation Vision, so I'll be representing Sweden and the Nordic countries as president of Vision. When I told my 10-year-old son yesterday that I would be speaking to hundreds of powerful trade union leaders at our Congress today, then he said to me, tell them, for heaven's sake, tell them not to stress. If they're under stress, when you're under stress, you don't do a good job. You can't work properly under stress. So I would like to pass that message on to you all today. I certainly think that we need to listen more closely to children. We're sitting here, after all, to create a better future for them, and I think we'd have a better world if we listened more to our children. So the message is no stress. There are plenty of issues that we need to deal with this morning. There are a number of names on the speakers list. Please stick to the allotted speaking time. Most people who take the floor are allowed 2 minutes or 3 minutes at the most to speak. Please respect that time limit. Many people have asked to speak, and if you go beyond the allotted time, we're going to have to interrupt you. So please respect your speaking time and thereby also the rights of others also to take the floor. We have been dealing with difficult and delicate issues, and often many different views and a lot of feelings and sensibilities are involved. So I ask you all to show respect for everyone. State your view in a respectful manner. I think everyone must have the feeling that they can say what they want to say in peace and safely. So please respect that. We've done so far, and I would like that to continue. What we're going to be looking at this morning is Section 6 of the Programme of Action, combating privatization and promoting quality public services. We're also going to be looking at proposed amendments 51 and 52 and amendments from affiliates number 24 with Amendment 76 and Resolution 25. And then we're going to move on to Section 3 of the Action Programme, Respect and Dignity for All. We are not going to be looking at Section 3.3, Young Workers, or Section 3.5, Fighting Racism and Xenophobia, or 3.7, Indigenous Peoples. But we will be looking at Amendments 26, 28, and 29 to the Programme of Action. And then we're going to move on to resolutions from affiliates, resolutions 4, 9, and 7. You will have seen in the program that it said that we would also be looking at resolution 7. Actually, that's what the program says, but that's been withdrawn. So Congress will only be looking at resolutions 4 and 9. And so with that, I suggest we now kick off. We're going to go on to a presentation of Section 6 of the P of A. I'm going to ask Andrea Russell from FPCGIL to introduce Section 6. Then we have 12 speakers on the list, on the speakers list. So please respect the time that's been allotted to you. When you see your name up on the screen, come up to the microphone and wait for your turn. I'll call your name, and then you have 2 minutes in which to speak. Andrea Russell, would you be kind enough to join us on the stage? You have 3 minutes. Sorry, 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes to introduce this section.
Dear delegates, the compression of public space is not something new of recent years, but has been going on for quite a while. In Italy and in so many countries around the world, Decades of budget cuts, austerity, outsourcing, and freezing of recruitment have handed us a picture of severely weakened public services that has contributed to our general unpreparedness for the pandemic. The pandemic crisis, the energy crisis, the conflicts that exploded in recent years, the high inflation that erodes the purchasing power of workers cannot lead to a new season of austerity. We need a major change in public policies. The pandemic has shown how essential public services really are and how the public sector is the only one that is able to respond to major crises without leaving anyone behind. For a reason that is as simple as it is trivial. The public sector is the only one whose fundamental mission is to protect the collective interest, while the private sector only has profit at heart. It is only the public sector that guarantees rights to each and everyone, while the private sector turns them into privileges for the few. The remunicipalization of essential services is not only possible, but necessary. We have demonstrated this in several sectors, from health to childcare services, through systematic mobilization and collective bargaining. We have put public value back at the center of the public agenda. Public health is an essential good that must be defended against those who instead believe that it is a privilege for the few, that the only way forward is to line the pockets of the large multinationals at the expense of the working class. The structural defunding that we have seen in recent years is one of the causes of the now no longer creeping privatization of health, the abandonment of the medical and health professions, the denial of the human right of universal access to care. On the childcare services, which are often forgotten but are a fundamental backbone of local communities, providing answers to the needs of citizens in terms of education and training of the new generations. State administrations and agencies need to pay much more attention in guarding fundamental functions such as IT, protecting people-sensitive data that are also a guarantee of the quality of democracy against all commercialization. A great effort is needed to restore decent wages and working conditions to workers. In Italy, we have launched a proposal for an extraordinary public employment plan for 1,200,000 people between now and 2030, and we think that similar proposals can be made all over the world. We must reverse the pattern. Every cent spent on public services is not a cost, but an investment. This is also why the role of our trade unions is essential. We can and must lead the change towards a fairer world, capable of responding to the great challenges of environmental, social, economic sustainability. We are engaged in an extraordinary season of renewal and social conflict to bring about change in public policies, which must serve the interests of the many and not the few. In Italy, we come from a long path of demonstrations, 3 in May, on the 24th of June, on the 7th of October, in the wake of a European mobilization that we all share within the ETUC. We cannot accept a new season of budget cuts and austerity in our region and throughout the world, with negative consequences on social spending and in general on workers and citizens. On the 13th of October, we were in Paris with the French trade unions for a beautiful and colorful demonstration with the flags of trade unions from all over Europe. On the 13th of December, we will take Brussels streets for a fair new deal for workers and more social justice, where it is important that there are delegations from all over Europe. We must be united in Europe and in the world, because united we are strong. Only through a common fight can we bring about the necessary change. Al lavoro e alla lotta.
Thank you very much, Andrea Russo. Now we're going to have speakers who want to address Section 6 of the Action of Programme, and then people will be allowed to move amendments. Adil Sharif of the National Municipal and Local Workers' Union in India is going to speak in favor of Section 6 of the POA. Please approach one of the microphones. You have 2 minutes in which to make your statement.
Hello, everybody. I'm Adil Sharif. I am General Secretary of the Indian National Municipal and Local Bodies Workers' Federation. Privatization is being pursued as a policy by various governments, both at state level and at the national level. Fighting privatization and promoting quality public services is an area of concern for all our union also. Privatization is leading to underemployment, unemployment, and also exploiting of the workers. The jobs are being outsourced, services are being privatized, and made chargeable for the people at large. Multinational corporations, irrespective of nationalities, are responsible for it. Regular jobs are being privatized and outsourced to the private companies who are exploiting workers by taking additional work and also reducing their wages. The contract outsourced workers are being threatened not to join trade unions and reducing the workforce. Because of this, the quality of public services are negatively impacted. Privatization is leading to reduced density at union level, reduced rights and protection at the workers level, and additional usage charges, and reduced the quality public services at the citizen level. Hence, privatization is not in the interest of the workers, not in the interest of the unions, and also not in the interest of the people at large. This is leading to taking our public services by private corporation solely with the intent to depriving the profits. Our federation is closely working with the National Center, Indian National Trade Union Congress, and also campaigning against the policy of privatization and working for remunicipalization of the privatized works in the interest of workers and the interest of people. We have organized majority of the outsourced employees and negotiating with the management and the government for better working conditions and for the better wages and to stop the exploitations. We will keep organizing and fight against privatization and promoting quality public services. We strongly believe that services should be public and not private, so that the services can be accessible to the poor and marginalized section of the society. We strongly believe in the people over profit and strongly oppose privatization. I also repeat, all of us, let us unite and fight for this privatization and remunicipalization of the outsourced workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adil. The next speaker will be Kjersti Balsam from NTL Norway, who will be speaking on behalf of the section.
Thank you, President. Trade union comrades, we finally meet again to discuss and make decisions in favor of employees in public sector and our members all over the world. Since we last met, we've experienced and we still experience a number of crises. And we've really experienced how important it is to have good preparedness and have a strong public sector. In the Norwegian Civil Service Union, we believe that preparedness is a public duty, and public workers are the very backbone of preparedness. But other players are also important, and we need to make sure that we pool our resources as best as we possibly can to face challenges, whether we talk about terror and war, nature disasters, climate emergencies, or what have you. Privatization, splitting up and dividing of services, and outsourcing and privatization have created more complex chains of decision-making and more vulnerability in a crisis. It becomes more unpredictable for employees and workers, poor democratic control, and a worsening of working conditions. We need to collaborate across the sectors between unions, and we need the entire team of workers on board to succeed in providing good welfare services. And one addition, private companies need to make money. They want to maximize their profits. That is a very poor goal in terms of preparedness. We want to secure good services for all the users, even if it's in the private sector. We have a public sector it was the public sector which was asked to resolve the matter of the COVID and take care of it, not the private sector. So it's not efficient with privatizations. We need more fellow workers, not fewer. A strong public sector is a better guarantee of equal treatment than market mechanisms. And I'm so pleased to see that we're all fighting together for a better world. People over profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Kersti. And I'm now going to give the floor to Jorge Buitrago from UNEPCA Colombia to speak to Section 6 of the POA.
Han kommer här. Varsågod. Varsågod, ordet är ditt. Du har 2 minuter.
You have the floor for 2 minutes.
A todos los asambleístas.
Good morning to Congress. Good morning to the panel. I'm Jorge Buitrago. I'm the president of the Trade Union of Public Workers of the Municipal Parliaments in Colombia. And I'm also a member of the Executive Committee of the Confederation of Legislative Workers of Latin America and the Caribbean. On the issue we're looking into today, I have called what I'm saying the insourcing of public services and its democratization. And I think this is cross-cutting for all the issues we're discussing. And of course, also relates to this resolution. I would like to say that before starting my small little speech that I'm very proud to be a trade unionist in this context in my country. To be a trade unionist, you're stigmatized. And people point to you because of your political status. And I'm very proud of being here and being a trade unionist. I would like to say that historically my country and other countries in the region, public employment has been taken on by the public class of the right. And we have the foreign capital mouthpiece and have made of public employment their heritage, this has been strengthened with the neoliberalism that has reduced the state and privatized public companies, and the work carried out were then carried out by private companies that were the owners of the same ownership of the same public political parties running the country and the region, manipulating things to their own interest, to their own political interest, and, of course, damaging public employment. That is why it is absolutely essential to overcome this historical crisis and to overcome neoliberalization and the privatization of public employment, to democratize it and to ensure equal opportunities to all members of society so that they can work with the state. And in this way, we'll also strengthen democracy in my country and in the countries of the region. I would now like to make a proposal for the plan of action of the PSI. I think that we need this chapter, which is fundamental for my country and for the region. That is to strengthen the systems of the civil service and in the administrative department, and also ensure democracy in all forms of work for the state in such a way that any public job carried out by the state or the public companies, there be transparent mechanisms so that ensure transparency for all citizens. Thank you.
Muy amables. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Suzanne Abacha from Unite the Union, UK. Take the floor. If you know that you're going to be speaking shortly, don't hesitate to come up and wait by the microphone to save time. Suzanne, you have the floor.
Hello, Congress. My name is Susan Abacho. I'm a councillor of United Union, speaking in support of Revolution 24. Congress, I'm an outsourced NHS worker. For over decades, our speech on public service in the UK has pressed issues that affect us all. The critical staff shortage in our public service are backbones of our society, providing vital functions that we take for granted. Whether it's healthcare, education, public safety, or many other essential services. Delegate public service worker, tiredness to ensure their well-being and smooth functions of their service. First, we warned of legal impact of austerity. Then, we fought back the Tories government who took knife to every vital public sector organs. Brexit and COVID almost finished the job. We now fight to replace the leftover of our pride in our NHS workers in the UK. This record of over 7.5 million people waiting for treatment. And there is extreme staff shortage in around 10% of post vacancies. Congress, NHS staffs have years of pay cuts. They have lost up to a third of real income. It is not only about load work going up. It is about resources, funding, and pays going down, burnout of public service workers. Congress, we see the government giving billions to private contractors who don't pay tax. Let's kick private profit outsource out of our service for good and call upon the government and policymakers to insource our job. Congress, the quality of public service impact on our daily lives, it is time for us to recognize the urgency of this issue and come together and ensure that our public service is staffed adequately. And Congress, I finish with this. Only then can we build a brighter future for our community and our nature. Please support. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm now going to move on to Totomi Iwanaga from Zensuido, Japan. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Good morning, Congress. I'm Tomomi Iwanaga from the All Japan Water Supply Workers Union in the Asia-Pacific region. Let me introduce myself briefly. I work for a water service company, and I deliver to the citizens safe water. That is what I am working hard towards. Now, I hereby express my support for the adoption of Section 6, fighting privatisation and promoting quality public services. Since the 1980s, more and more public services have been privatised and commercialised. Profit-driven companies have been using them as tools to maximise their profits, resulting in threatening the lives of the general public. But from around the 2000s, public services such as water, electricity, rail services, waste and healthcare have been re-municipalised in some countries and regions. Public services are governed by the state or local governments. This makes them more sustainable and helps improve the employment and working conditions of their workers. Also, the public have greater access to information these days, so their literacy about public services has improved. But in some regions, including Japan, privatisation and marketisation are still on the rise. We will stand in solidarity in the fight against privatisation and continue to fight for quality public services. 共に頑張ろう. Let's fight together in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you. The next to speak will be Ramazan Agar of Yolish, Turkey. Go ahead.
Distinguished President, distinguished delegates of the PSI Congress, distinguished colleagues and friends, I respectfully greet all of you on behalf of the Turkish Union of Road, Construction and Building Workers and of over 50,000 members of Yolish. Dear colleagues, as stated in the Congress slogan, we are in the age of multiple crises. Economic recovery has begun after the pandemic, but income inequality still persists. Wars around the world add political problems to economic difficulties. However, while people are struggling for their lives, capital continues to add to its wealth. And behind this increase of their wealth lies, of course, the oppression of workers' wages. Dear colleagues, global competition is built on labor costs, and this system has never stepped back. The name of this system, which is based on the exploitation of labor, is subcontracting. Subcontracting deprives us of jobs, income, and living security and job safety. It imposes discrimination and deunionization on workers within the same workplace. Subcontracting, which is promoted by employers and governments aiming to reduce labor costs and to ease dismissals, has now become a deadly threat to all workers around the world. Dear friends, we, as Yolish, first secured the permanent employment of 10,000 road workers and then of all subcontracted workers in the public sector in Turkey. Now, let us stop subcontracting all over the world, which prioritizes deregulation over laws and regulations, privatization over quality public services, and profit over people's right to live. I greet the Congress on behalf of my union Yolish, which is celebrating its 60th anniversary, as well as 60 years of affiliation to PSI. I hope that wars will come to an end and innocent people will not die. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and congratulations on your sector's anniversary. I now call on Bos van Wegberg of FNV Netherlands.
Everyone. It's Bos, by the way, not Boss. That would be awkward. Comrades, our public services are the single biggest guarantee for advancement of the quality of life of all. And the quality of our public services is directly linked to the quality of work of our members in the public sector. And as the son of a care home worker and a bus driver, I've seen those working conditions deteriorate. While nobody could have foreseen the extreme inflation numbers we've experienced, the record number of public strikes should come as no surprise, because that's what you get if you don't care for those workers that care for all of us. And that's why, as member of the National Executive Board of FNV, and I'm responsible for the public sector and climate action, I want to express our full support for this part of the POA. Our union was involved in devising the original text back in 2017 and is looking forward to continuing the good work with PSI and all of you in the coming years. Because in the Netherlands and across the globe, a new dawn is approaching and shouting to us that it's our moment, the moment for investing in our public services. And that means investing in the quality of work for our members and not investing in the pockets of private profiteers. That also means taking essential services back in our collective hands, as just discussed by the panel. This also goes for the combat against dangerous climate change. We need a public pathway to ensure a just and swift transition to an economy within planetary boundaries. Comrades, we need to seize the moment and do what we know so well, how to organize and how to fight. So, let's fight.
Thank you, Bose. I apologize to all of you if I don't pronounce your names properly. I'm now going to call on Luciana Maria de Mello from SINCEP SIP, Brazil.
Good morning, comrades. I am Lucia Maria de Mello. I'm Vice President of SINCEP, the Public Workers of the Municipal Workers of São Paulo. We do support the plan of action. Comrades, we are not going to lower ourselves. Privatization of state companies and of public services will not bring any advantage to the population. And in a country such as mine, Brazil, which is marked by profound historical disequalities, we have to protect the environment and management and health and education and sanitation and transport. Public services, dear colleagues, in these areas means the survival of the population. I would like to say here that the Lula government has cancelled privatization and has passed a plan to insource these services and has suggested reprivatizing 10 companies such as Petrobras, and its administration has now come back to public hands. Unfortunately, some governments from the extreme right, the example of the governor of São Paulo, one of the larger states in Latin America, wants to privatize our good, our most important good, which is water, colleagues and comrades. And we do know that the privatization of basic sanitation and public transport can have a direct impact on the quality of life of the population, and beyond leading to higher costs for the population. Comrades, we're not going to accept this, comrades. This runs counter to the remunicipalization of water and energy. Now, here I would like to mention the monitoring carried out by an environment company with the support of our PSI. There were 1,680 cases of deprivatization of public service in the world in 2000, according to the data established. In 2010, 416 cases took place, and an average of 37 a year, in other words. I would like to insist, we have to have public services for all. Ladies, be it for everybody, all diversities, and for the more vulnerable, comrades. We are trade unionists. We want to build a world, a better world, based on profit. Rights are not a good. Water is not a good. Water is a right. It's not a good. Water is a right. Water is not a good. Water is a right. Water is not a good. Water is a right. Water is not a good. It is a right.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to give the floor to Narjis Jahan from the Women Workers Welfare Union of Bangladesh. Go ahead. And would the next speaker please also get ready to take the floor?
Jahan from Bangladesh, where public services are privatized. Privatization has a big impact, includes public-private partnership, corporatization of public services, outsourcing of public services. Privatization affects that are essential in the advancement of women human rights, priority health care, education, drinking water and sanitation, water, energy services, public administration, criminal justice, transport, telecommunication, railway, municipality, bank, etc. The challenges is our working workers are faces irrespective of their socio-economic grounds. Families' issues are discrimination in terms of facilities, work condition at workplace, social challenges, and sexual harassment. In this situation, our recommendation is trade unions should set their strategies on this privatization with the government priorities, the interests and needs of workers. It is essential to develop an innovative, effective and transparent mechanism of support for the workers. Unions should also lead negotiation regarding this issue, support by lobbying bilateral agreement with the host countries. We support the program of action from our side, especially on the program of action section 6, because privatization is very bad impact for South Asia. So we need strong support and solidarity from you against privatization, for fighting privatization and promoting quality public services. Good solidarity for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Makai Maki from the Civil Servants and Allied Workers Union of Zambia. You have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much and good morning, Congress. My name is Makai Makai from the Civil Servants and Allied Workers Union of Zambia. I am at the same time the chairperson for the NCC. In supporting the motion on the floor, I just want to give you a Zambian perspective. Zambia has been independent for 59 years now. And in these 9 years, we've had 7 presidents. Out of the 7 presidents, 3 have a background of trade unionism. And the first president, Dr. Kaunda, when he became president, he privatized all the institutions. Then after that, Chiluba came in 1991, and promoted the issue of privatization. Kaunda nationalized, Chiluba came in and privatized. Now, what are the lessons that we have learned as a union? Chiluba promoted privatization because he wanted service delivery to be enhanced. He wanted wealth creation to be enhanced. But after so many years, in 1996, 75,000 workers were retrenched, of which many were women. Out of those who were retrenched, some of them, even up to today, as I speak to you colleagues, they have not gotten their payments. Some of them have died without getting their payments. So what is our position as a trade union movement in Zambia? Our position is that we do not support privatization. And we stand here to support the move that privatization should not be supported at any cost. People over profit. Workers move. Thank you.
The next speaker is Enedina Soares of ETAMCE Brazil. You have the floor for 2 minutes.
Good morning to all brothers and sisters. I would like to say hello to all the delegations and trade unions on the behalf of the LGBT plus who are at this Congress. Quite truly, I would like to say and express our full support to the plan action and amendments 51 and 52 in Brazil. Since 2016, we had a terrible government of Bolsonaro. We've implemented neoliberal reforms that impoverished the working class. And they created jobs without any rights and had impact on public services with precarious work contracts, and different benefits and rights were withdrawn, and the situation was worse and worse. The Bolsonaro government privatized 36% of the private services and did intend to do far more. The Lula government that was elected, and when he came to power, and is trying to redress the situation, and the National Congress is seeking to strengthen the Brazilian state and wants to and is trying to reverse the laws that are aimed at privatizing the public services and to reduce by 25% of the public sector salaries. And so I would like to say that we are now struggling so that nurses have the necessary resources so as to guarantee that all nursing jobs have appropriate contracts and have a living wage, and that they have appropriate working hours, 44 hours a week, because the nursing sector is suffering from a lot of outsourcing, and this is immoral. The public services have to have working conditions conditions that are appropriate because they want to be able to continue saving lives. We want the working conditions so that public services can continue caring for people. We want to put people over profit. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker for this section of the POA is Sarah Gretchen Adeva of PS Link from the Philippines. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Sarah Gretchen Adeva, a first-time Congress delegate from PS Link and a registered nurse, a licensed professional teacher, and hopefully a lawyer by this December. I take the courage to speak in support of this program of action because I know how privatization has wreaked havoc on practically all of our essential public services in the Philippines, from water, electricity, to education, health, and care. Now, there are massive and insidious efforts to privatize and commodify our health services, leading to expensive, inaccessible health services and underfunding and understaffing of public health and care. Privatization has weakened our public health services, destroyed decent jobs, led to widespread precarity and informalization of healthcare work, and exploited unpaid care work rendered by hundreds of thousands of community health workers who are mainly women. These community health workers are not recognized as workers, are not paid wages, don't have social protection, and are often victims of violence and harassment at work. Privatization and the lack of decent work in health and care sectors are also pushing our health workers to migrate for work abroad out of necessity, not out of choice. And this exodus of our health and care workers further exacerbate the health and multiple crises we are facing in the country. My union, PS Link, together with the broad labor movement and allied civil society, is fighting back through union organizing and education, lobbying for alternative public budgets and progressive tax reforms, including wealth tax, holding media campaigns, and other joint actions. Fellow comrades, we must reinvigorate our campaign against privatization and the neoliberal agenda, assert the strategic role of quality public services in ensuring tax, trade, and climate justice, and rebuild the social organization of care. Mabuhay ang PSI! Long live PSI!
Tack så mycket och tack för att ni håller tiden och är redo när ni ska tala. Vi har nu haft alla talare för handlingsprogrammet sektion 6 och kommer gå vidare att titta på ändringsförslagen. Och då har vi ändringsförslag nummer 51 till handlingsprogrammet sektion 6. Och det ändringsförslaget stöds av styrelsen. Och jag ber då Didier Dumont från CGT FDSP Frankrike att berätta om ändringsförslag 51. Du har 3 minuter. Varsågod. Varsågod.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. Good morning, dear comrades, dear Congress members. The Federation wanted to table this amendment on the public service on water, sanitation, waste removal and processing, and the street cleaning, because when we mention these services, it's mainly for the most obvious mission they fulfill, that is, of the service they provide to populations to make their lives easier. And this in a way that seems so natural that the users don't even realize that these services, these public services exist. And they only realize this when this work is no longer done. And that is when they realize they exist. Of course, we also would like to stress this public service role, but we do consider that this doesn't reflect the missions, the most ambitions they full out. Indeed, PSI highlighted this for several decades now. In their struggles for a right of access to water and sanitation, without denying the lack of water that is hitting many countries. There are several billion people who, whilst they do have water in their areas of life, suffer from not having drinking water. And I'm not even talking about drinking and healthy water. The main cause of this is the lack or obsolescence of public services for water, for the treatment and purification of water, and sanitation for water before before it is discharged in the environment, and also the waste processing activities. In France, it was highlighted in the 19th century that in many epidemics were caused because people were drinking water that was drawn from the same place as dirty water was discharged. Hence, the primary and essential roles fulfilled by water public services, sanitation, waste removal and processing, and street cleaning act to ensure public health as well as to reduce pollution. And this is never highlighted or even sometimes even ignored, whilst they're absolutely essential for the health, the life and the protection of the environment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when the public services do exist, they once again really contributed and proved how efficient they were to do away or get rid of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and to reduce the spreading of the epidemic in France. Some 50 local authorities in public management set up with public laboratories as well and with teachers from the Sorbonne University a network to analyze and monitor the sewage. It was called the Aubépine network. Indeed, laboratory technicians realized that the SARS-CoV-2 genomes were detected in sewage, and this well before people fell ill. And this has made it possible, for instance, to help prevent and protect the emergency units and reduce the number of hospital admissions, whilst in many countries and other local authorities have done likewise, and the scientists and local authorities do consider it is important to maintain such surveillance so as to prevent return of COVID-19 or even a new virus. The French government has chosen to stop funding this network. The Federation would want to bring back to the forefront the fundamental and essential missions played by public services for public health and the environment by tabling this amendment. We would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all workers in these sectors that are carrying out dangerous jobs, difficult jobs and unhealthy ones. And finally, I would just like to say that we are the workers of public service, all their representatives. We know our work. We know how to carry it out. It is not shareholders that know our jobs and create wealth. We are the ones who do it, and we have to be proud of this. Long live insourcing, long live public services, long live the PSI.
Thank you, Didier. I have no one who's asked to speak against Amendment 51, so I suggest that we now put this to the vote. That's Amendment 51. Would all those in favor of Amendment 51 please raise your delegate card now? Those in favor of the amendment, thank you. You can take your cards back again. And those against Amendment 51, please raise your delegate card now. Thank you. I hereby declare that Amendment 51 to Section 6 of the Programme of Action has been carried. Now we can move on to Amendment 52 to Section 6 of the Programme of Action, which is also supported by the Executive Board, like the previous one. The person who is going to move this amendment is, it's going to be Lisa Galvão from COMB SEF of Brazil. She's going to move this amendment.
Good morning to you all. The amendment. I'm speaking as a leader of the CONSEF, Federation of Workers of the Federal District. I think we have to, that we support this session, but we would like to make an amendment. And anyway, it is said the PSI will have priority with the activities with the affiliates, and we have put forward this amendment, and we really think this is important given what has happened with privatization. Originally, what was suggested here to improve, to try and counter threats of privatization. Our amendment is or the replacement of public service management and delivery by private bodies disguised as outsourced social, charity, non-profit, salary, or public interest organizations. We want to know, we would like to say that we have to really take care. So it is to really, we have to stress that this is the proposal and this is the management, so as to really have public services is properly managed, especially as we know those who are managing the public, that we know what are behind these proposals is to try and replace public services. So we have to include this amendment to avoid this replacement. And because of the experience in Brazil since the 90s with the different governments, be it the central governments, the Fernando Henrique government, and all other governments have indeed dismantled the public service over the years, which have done this both at central level and regional level, and have also depleted the workers of their rights, with a lack of public policies and social policies for the population. And I think that we just have to think of the kilometers of waiting lines in the social providence offices. And this obviously does make it very difficult and makes the working class life extremely difficult in Brazil. I think this is an example that probably can be found in many other countries. So we want to really prepare the trade unions so that they really are proactive and to really propose that and say that it's not important to privatize, but it is very important to remunicipalize the services. And this is because the population over profit is what we say here at the PSI. And it really, and this has, and just as life is above war. Thank you.
Tack. Och då ber jag
Thank you very much. I'm now going to call Sébastien Ménez-Plier of FNME CGT France to speak on behalf of Amendment 52. Thank you. Good morning, sisters and brothers. I'm very happy to be here in Geneva for this 31st Congress of PSI. The speakers this morning, what they said has demonstrated that public services are being threatened. In the energy sector, it is just as much the case as everywhere else. So I would like to denounce the deregulation process that is ongoing. We support Amendment 52. The rules, the laws of market and privatization are resulting in this privatization. It's resulting in energy access being expensive and rare, and it becomes reliant on geopolitical tensions. Energy supplies and the energy sector is not able to act sufficiently quickly to deal with climate change and environment. For this energy sector has to move towards a carbon-free environment. It's difficult. It's becoming more and more difficult because the prices are so high imposed by market laws. There's unfair competition when it comes to access to raw materials and commodities, and there's political tension. In this context, whereas different governments claim that they want to move towards energy transition based on abundant energy without carbon, it is urgent that the laws of market and unfair competition be attacked. We at CGT consider energy as a public good that everyone should be entitled to have regardless of market conditions and public policies. Wherever energy is privatized, we need to set up, to map deregulation and privatization. We must us, the workers, to deal. They are the experts. They work in the local governments who are suffering from this deregulation, this harmful deregulation. We must use local connections. That's the way we're going to be able to move towards renationalization or remunicipalization of the energy sector. In France, CGT has launched a battle to wage against the private electricity sector. It's being coordinated between the intersyndicale and the public service unions, but also we want to raise awareness for the public by campaigns and alerting national and local politicians. For the time being, we've been able to put an end to the privatization of our historical electricity provider. I hope that we're going to be able to move back to a situation where the whole energy sector becomes a public good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your support. Long live the PSI. Thank you very much. No one has spoken against Amendment 52, so we can move on to the vote. I would like to ask you all to vote on Amendment 52. Would those in favor of Amendment 52 raise your delegate card now? Those in favor of Amendment 52, raise your delegate card. Those against Amendment 52, please raise your delegate's card. Those against now. I declare that Congress has adopted proposed Amendment 52, and we can now vote on the whole of Section 6 of the Action Programme, and that includes the amendments, the proposed amendments which we just adopted, 51 and 52. Those in favor of adopting Section 6 of the POA as including the two amendments, please raise your delegate card. Those in favor of Section 6 of the Programme of Action, thank you. Now those against Section 6 of the Programme of Action, please raise your delegate card now. I don't see any votes against. I declare, therefore, that Section 6 of the Programme of Action has thus been adopted. Now we are going to move on to Resolution 24, which deals with risk to staff working in public services. Gary Feist from the American Federation of Teachers from the United States of America is going to move Resolution 24. You have the floor. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name is Gary Feist. I'm a member of the American Federation of Teachers, and I'm a tax auditor in the state of North Dakota in the United States. We bring you this resolution today because for far too many frontline public sector workers are full of deep frustration and sheer mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. The stories we hear from our own AFT members are heartbreaking. Teachers are overloaded by administrators and left to crowded classrooms. Healthcare workers are assigned too many patients in shifts that last too long. And public sector workers once entrusted with the public welfare are now seeing their jobs privatized. Low pay, attacks on defined benefit pension plans, hostile, unsupportive work environments are some of the reasons that public sector is struggling to retain its staff. Public employees are leaving in record numbers. While employment levels in the private sector have rebounded and have even increased since 2020, over 650,000 state and local government jobs remain vacant. In North Dakota, corporate income tax auditor jobs have dropped by 50%. Human service jobs have had turnover rates of 80%. In the state of Maryland, 14% of the public safety jobs and 10% of transportation jobs and 1 in 4 nursing positions are unfilled. In Georgia last year, state employee turnover hit 25%, and the state's Department of Corrections faced a 50% vacancy rate. The impact of these unfilled jobs hits our high-need citizens the hardest. Local government employees who stay in these jobs are overwhelmed with high workloads, further delaying the delivery of crucial services to the citizens. Decades of understaffing have reached us to this critical point, and it's at the making of our employers. Our communities, meanwhile, are left with fewer services or higher costs, and even in the case of our healthcare workers, danger to our patients' lives. We must invest in the workforce, improve the working conditions, make our workplaces safer, and engage public sector workers in collaborative decision-making. Please support this resolution.
Thank you very much. I have speakers who want to address Resolution 24. Silje Nausvik of the Nurses Organization of Norway will be the first to speak to Resolution 24. You have 2 minutes.
Resolution 24 addresses one of the largest challenges society as a whole faces. In a world of multiple concurrent crises, with the starved healthcare sector at its core, it is urgent to solve the massive staff shortage in the public sector. As a nurse and a health professional, like many of you, I know that the consequences of not doing so will be grave. For the staff working in the public sector, of course, but not the least for the ones that rely on a strong public sector for access to education, healthcare, and quality public services. Access to health and care services is a prerequisite for all citizens, fostering viable communities and local businesses. However, a global shortage of nurses and health workers persists. Financing the public healthcare sector must be seen as an investment in health for all. Because remember, it's not the moral responsibility of our health workers to compensate for funding gaps. That's why efforts to recruit, mobilize, and retain health personnel must be identified. Improving job quality in health sector can significantly reduce sick leave, turnover, and part-time work. Additionally, the gender-segregated labor shortage highlights the need to make the healthcare sector more attractive to all genders through equal pay and improved working conditions. Trust is at stake. Strong unions and social dialogue must be the answer, not hostility, polarization, or self-sufficiency. It's time for action. You clapped for us, now you need to act for us.
Thank you. The next speaker is Sayaka Ishikawa from JPSU Japan.
私は石川さやかです。日本の国交連合から参加しています。日本の発言者は最後に共に頑張ろうと言いますので、ぜひ注目してください。第24号決議案に賛同する立場で発言します。日本においても厳しい財政状況を背景に、公務、公共
Sorry, we had the problems with interruption, but I think the function now. Okay, you can continue. Thank you.
So
I speak in favor of Resolution 24. My name is Sayaka Ishikawa. In Japan also, we have a very difficult financial situation, and we have seen drastic cuts in the number of staff as a result of that. So with regards to workload, there is certainly not a sufficient number of workers. We have overtime, and this has become very much the norm. And because of these harsh working conditions, there has been a serious impact in the physical health and mental well-being of workers. Lots of people are having to take time off work as a result of this. And of course, as a result of this, fewer youngsters want to come into the profession, and this is a serious problem in terms of securing able human resources. Of course, this affects the quality of the service we provide to our citizens, and the trust of our citizens vis-à-vis our services is also at threat. We have been calling on the Japanese government to ensure that there are a sufficient number of workers and the necessary budget is there to ensure that we can continue to provide these essential services. Recently, we have seen more people coming on board. However, this is still clearly not enough. So I do understand that Japan is not alone in all of this, and this problem exists in other countries, including the United States. We need to call upon people to realize the importance of the public service that we provide, and we need to have everyone on board taking action. I want to work together with our brothers and sisters to achieve this goal. This concludes my remarks. Tomo ni ganbaro. Let's fight together in solidarity.
Thank you very much. I have no more names on my list for Resolution 24, but there is an amendment which we need to discuss before we take the vote. It's Amendment 76 to Resolution 24. The Executive Board supports this amendment. I'm going to call on Sandy Morton from United Services Union of Australia to move Amendment 76. You have 3 minutes.
In Australia, in 1996, funding of local government was 1% of total tax revenue. The amount now stands at 0.25%. Local government is restricted from raising funds, with some states being subject to rate capping. All local government authorities must deal with cost shifting. When a federal or state government withdraws the provision of a service, it falls to local government to take over the service delivery with no financial assistance. As a result of the continued reductions to revenue funding, Australia's 537 councils are hundreds of billions of dollars in arrears of funding. To ensure the sustainability and longevity of local government, it is essential that all national governments allocate a fixed and ongoing percentage of total tax revenue to ensure sufficient provision of public services and secure, well-paying employment. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers who would like to speak on Amendment 76. Therefore, I'm going to put the resolution to the vote. Would you please vote on Amendment 76? Those in favor of Amendment 76, please raise your delegates' cards. Those in favor of Amendment 76 to Resolution 24, raise your card. Thank you. Those against Amendment 76, please raise your delegate badge. I declare the amendment carried by Congress. Thank you. We can now move to resolution. I've got to put Resolution 24 to the vote. Would you please prepare to vote for Resolution 24? Would those in favor of Resolution 24 please raise your delegate badge? Those in favor of Resolution 24. Thank you. If you are against Resolution 24, please raise your delegate badge now. I declare Resolution 24 carried by vote of Congress. Thank you. We can now move on to Resolution 25. And I'm going to call on Sang-hee-woo from the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union from South Korea to move Resolution 25. You have 3 minutes to do so.
Thank you, Chair. The Korean government pursued a direct and aggressive privatization policy from the late 1990s to the early 2000s, based on neoliberal policies imposed in return for an IMF bailout following the 1997-1998 Asian economic crisis. Although the Korean government's policy of direct privatization of public services failed in 2002, when the KPTU Korea Power Plant Industry Unions won a 38-day strike to stop the Korean government's policy of privatizing public energy. the South Korean government has continued to pursue stealth privatization over the past 2 decades. In particular, the current right-wing conservative Korean government, which came to power in May last year, has made maintaining fiscal soundness a top priority of its governance, pushing for corporate tax cuts and tax breaks for the wealthy, even though the country's debt-to-GDP ratio is less than half the OECD average, and has implemented a draconian austerity policy that has forced budget and staff cuts in essential public services, such as energy, railways, health and care, public pensions, national health insurance, and public transport. In response to the Korean government's austerity and privatization policies, the KPTU successfully launched an online petition campaign last year, which resulted in the introduction of the Framework Act in the National Assembly in March 2023 to prohibit the privatization of 12 public services, including energy, water, transport, aviation, education, and healthcare, and to force the municipalization of these already privatized services. However, the bill had stalled in the National Assembly due to opposition from the ruling party. The solution to reducing deepening inequalities and ensuring public services for all in the midst of multiple crises is not to reduce the public sector through austerity, but to strengthen and expand the universal quality public services. I therefore call on delegates to support Resolution 25 and to stand in solidarity with public service workers in South Korea who are struggling in the face of repression by the South Korean government's denial of collective bargaining rights and repression of the right to strike for public sector unions, which are the last bastion of defense and expansion of public services. Thank you.
Tack. Och då går vi vidare till Ernest Green från CUPE, Kanada, som kommer tala för resolution nummer 25. Varsågod, du har 2 minuter.
Good morning, comrades. My name is Ernest Green. I'm an healthcare worker from Canada. I'm speaking in support of this resolution on behalf of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and this is my first PSI Congress as well. We are very familiar with the disastrous consequences of austerity budgets and privatization. And we know that privateers are always testing out new strategies in different countries, trying to see what they can get away with and hoping we're not talking to each other. But we are talking to each other, and we're strategizing across borders every day. CUPE went to Seoul in July and met with KPTU members and the public care workers who were gearing up for a fight. This fight we all need to support. The workers from the Seoul Pacific Agencies for Social Services, or PASS for short, shared with us how they were resisting the closure of several public community centers, including child care centers. The mayor of Seoul and the city council were imposing budget cuts that would worsen working conditions, threatening their wages, and completely undermine the quality of care they were providing to the public. After seeing the first-hand devastation caused by for-profit providers in long-term care homes in Canada, we really condemn the actions of this government. If the mayor goes through with the neoliberal plan, the consequences will be disastrous for all workers and the public that they serve. Establishing the PASS was a progressive achievement that would really have an impact on gender equality and access to care for low-income communities, particularly women. This is worth fighting, and it's time like this that we all need to support our comrades in their fight. Thank you, in solidarity, everybody.
Tack. Och eftersom vi bara haft talare för resolution.
Thank you. And because we only have speakers in favor of resolution 25, we're now going to proceed with the vote. And I'm going to ask everyone to get ready for the vote on resolution 25. All those in favor of resolution 25, please raise your cards now. Everyone in favor of this resolution, thank you. Thank you. Now, all those against Resolution 25, please show now. Thank you very much. I find that Congress has resolved to adopt Resolution 25. Thank you. Now we're going to proceed with Section 3 in the Programme of Action. The respect and skills for all. We have many speakers, in fact. We're going to do everything we can to keep track of the times and the standing orders and speaking times. Of course, we're going to begin by having a presentation of Section 3, and then we'll have the speakers list. I'm going to ask you all to be prepared and remember to stick to the limited speaking time. Gloria Mills is our first speaker from the UK. She will introduce Section 3 of the Programme of Action, Respect and Dignity for All. And we're not going to deal with 3.3 and 3.5 now. Gloria Mills, you have the floor.
Du har 5 minuter. Welcome. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And just to say, I'm Gloria Mills from Unison and EPSI, and I'm really pleased to be able to speak on this section of the report, in commending it to you in the first instance. Introducing Section 3, I just want to say I'm covering 3.2, 3.4, 3.6, and 3.8. 3.2 is fighting for gender equality and justice, 3.4 on migration and refugees, 3.6 on LGBT plus workers, and 3.8 on workers with disabilities. Comrades, Congress, I cannot do justice to the scope and the scale of the excellent work the PSI and all of its equality committees, including the Women's Committee, have done in the last 5 years. But I want to commend the Programme of Action on fighting for gender justice and for equality. It's really important that I just give you a brief highlight of some of the things we've done. We've had so many challenges, and we have also had huge game changers. And I think it's really important when I say that we've had huge game changers that I start with acknowledging some of our achievements. You heard yesterday the President reported that we had surpassed gender parity. We have 52% of delegates here are women. We also have our first non-binary delegates here, and we have 61 young members. That is an achievement. And it is really commendable. And it's thanks to every one of you in all of your regions, in all of your affiliates for making this happen. And these are no small achievements. These are hard-won rights, hard-won achievements, and we must not be complacent because we know that the price of progress is eternal vigilance. So in PSI, we are making a difference, a huge difference. We are not standing still. And the reason why you don't stand still is because we have to create new legacies in pushing the boundaries of progress, in building strong workforces, building women's power, building workers' power, but also building trade union power. So we are on a mission to build a strong and inclusive trade union movement, but we are fighting on all fronts. I want to pay a special thanks to the European Public Services Union, EPSU, for the excellent leadership and work you have given, together with the TUC, the French trade unions, the European TUC, who have been on the road last Friday, but also right across Europe, mobilizing right into the new year, fighting on the road for a fair deal, but sending a strong message to governments, not just across Europe, but across the world, that we will not pay the price of austerity Mark II. I think that's a very important message that we need to send, because we have seen that it's women who have paid, women, marginalized workers, migrant workers, who have paid the price of austerity. And what we are saying is that we will not be paying the price. We will not have women at the forefront, in the forefront, being exposed to all of these discrimination. So what we want to do is to say that, yes, we are fighting to close the gender pay gap. We are also making sure that we look at areas in terms of fighting for disabled workers and on disability rights. And we have done a lot of work in closing and trying to close the gender pay gap, but the disability pay gap and the race pay gap as well. And we also need to look at some of our achievements. Our affiliates have achieved huge changes. In my own union, we have launched a national care service in Unison to give respect, dignity, and rights and decent pay to care workers. And I think that's a really important achievement. The majority of them are migrant workers. And, you know, I want to send one message out. Being a migrant worker, being a foreigner, being a refugee, being an asylum seeker is not a license for hate, it's not a license for disrespect, and it's not a license, you know, to demonize, to scapegoat people and to attack them because of their difference. My parents and my family are proud Irish and proud Caribbean migrants, and they make a difference everywhere in the world, and they do speak up. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge all of the progress that we are making. And on LGBT rights, I want to thank all the unions for the excellent work that they're doing all over in terms of promoting rights for LGBT plus workers. We have had huge rights. We've had El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay, Argentina. Workers and trade unions have been able to ratify ILO Convention C-190. In Unison, over 2,000 members have been trained as transgender allies. This is a huge achievement in providing leadership in action. The FNV in the Netherlands have done excellent work, CCOO in Spain, and we've had many unions in Canada, in the United States, in the UK, standing up and speaking up and saying we will not stand by whilst our LGBT plus members are attacked by populist politicians and governments for electoral gain and for political advantage. So what we're doing, we're challenging all of the poisonous toxicity, all the toxic rhetorics that governments are promoting, and just say, thank you very much. We will rebuild trade union power, and thank you for all the excellent support you have given us. Thanks.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm now going to give the floor to people who want to address Section 3 of the Programme of Action. Jonna Boima from Jytte, Finland, is the first to speak.
Thank you, dear delegates. I'm Jonna Boima, the chair of my union in Finland. In Finland, we have been very proud of our role as the model country. The Finnish women got the right to vote as the first country in the world. We are also politically active. The new right-wing government in Finland threatens to destroy everything that we have achieved over the past decades. This is a disgrace. If this happens, it will put us back into the past. We need to work in order to put the wage gap in order. We managed to have a bigger wage increase in the public sector in our last negotiations. But now the Finnish government has said that these results are not accepted. The male-dominated sector will determine the wage increase that we cannot exceed. So therefore, we will not be able to do anything about the wage inequality. These are just fine words in the Finnish government program, but there are no concrete measures. Instead, we see a lot of decreases, a lot of cuts. Dear friends, the development in the past few months in Finland have shown that labor rights like equality, for example, require that we work constantly. We cannot take these as self-evident. Our work and our duty in PSI is to gather our strength and to work together for equality, globally and also in Finland. Together we are strong. Viva PSI!
Tack Jonna. Då går vi vidare till
Thank you, Jonna. Now give the floor to Sinera Ribeiro from Vårdförbundet in Sweden. Thank you very much, Chair, colleagues. As president of the Vårdförbundet, but also as a registered nurse, I really want to emphasize the fact that health is a human right. It's vital that we don't leave anyone by the side of the road. That's part of our professional ethics. We need to take care of ourselves and others. As far as I'm concerned, we are here to contribute to a community that's based on solidarity and unity. We want to work towards equality and fairness with economic growth and good working conditions. We want to reduce the gaps which are widening across the world today. The right to health must not leave anyone, must not be denied anyone. The basic principles of health care are clear. Care must be provided and delivered with respect in the same way to everyone, and those with the greatest needs should be given priority. And this is true regardless of nationality, skin color, sexual orientation. We're very proud, extremely proud of our profession, and we want to continue to do our best to provide the best possible health care. And that is why we're alerting to the dangerous situation in the care sector. Healthcare sector must be such as to provide the possibility for skilled workers to do a professional job together. Decent working conditions must become self-evident. We must go back to a situation where staffing levels are such that people can take retirement at the right time when one does retire instead of falling ill before that time. We want action plans that will promote equality in the community and equality when it comes to access to health. For that to be achieved, working conditions for care workers must be improved, and there must be better terms for holidays, pay and retirement. That only will provide safe care. We, as trade union leaders around the world, have to have the courage to complain when colleagues are not given the right conditions to do their work properly, if they can't manage to work throughout their professional lives. Together we are strong. Together we can make a change. And that is why we support Section 3 of the Action Programme, the Programme of Action. Thank you. Thank you, Sineva. I'm going to call on Yong Kim of KPTU Korea to take the floor.
예, 안녕하십니까. 먼저 한국어 통역이 가능한지
I'd like to first of all check that everyone is listening to the Korean English translation since I'll be speaking in Korean. Hello, my name is Kim Young-ae, Young-ae Kim, chair of the KPTU Women's Committee. On the 14th of September 2022, we witnessed the brutal murder of a female metro worker who was working alone at her workplace in a Seoul metro station. The victim was brutally murdered at work after reporting a criminal who had been stalking her and illegally filming her at work. He was a colleague who had been suspended from his job. But in the years since the incident, it is unclear how the employer has been responding to the case to prevent recurrence. And we have been continuously calling for the assignment of 2 workers per team to be assigned to the stations to ensure the safety of metro station staff. But the Seoul Metropolitan Government and the Seoul Metro Corporation are trying to force through restructuring by cutting more than 2,000 jobs over the next few years. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration of South Korea and Mayor Oh Se-hoon of Seoul have done virtually nothing to ensure the safety of workers and citizens. While Seoul's metros are run by public corporations, more than half of South Korea's metros are privately contracted. In many of these privately contracted metro stations, it is even more difficult to assign 2 workers to a team to be assigned to a station, and there are even unmanned stations. And this is all to ensure the private operators' profits. The KPTU is still engaged in struggles, including strikes against the government's privatization policies in key national industries such as health, electricity, gas, and railways, which have a profound impact on the quality of public services and the safety of workers. So we are still in the midst of these struggles. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the PSI Asia Pacific Regional Office for its attention and support in the murder case of the woman worker at the Sindang station last year. And the KPTU will continue to work to eradicate workplace harassment and create a safe workplace free of sexual violence and a safe society for all. And such efforts will include calling for ratification of the ILO Convention 190 by the South Korean government. We will work together for gender equality. We ask for your support and solidarity. Thank you. Chujeng.
Tack. Då välkomnar jag fram Malin Ragnegård från Kommunal Sverige som vill tala för sektion 3.2 i handlingsprogrammet. Varsågod Malin, du har 2 minuter.
Tack. Kongressdeltagare, kamrater. Kvinnors rättigheter, fackliga rättigheter och mänskliga rättigheter är delar av samma kamp. Utmaningarna och kriserna vi befinner oss i visar att det är så. Ekonomiska kriser slår hårdast mot kvinnor. Besparingar och effektiviseringar, de landar först på kvinnorna, som redan har de lägsta lönerna och som har det största ansvaret för hushåll, barn och äldre. När världen skakas av konflikter, naturkatastrofer och pandemier, då riskerar kvinnor inte bara att bli av med sin försörjning, utan också att bli utsatta för våld i hemmet. Kvinnors arbetsmiljö är ofta tuff på ett mer mångfacetterat sätt än män. Förutom tunga lyft, orimliga arbetstider och samvetsstress riskerar de också att utsättas för sexuella trakasserier. Att själva jobbet i värsta fall kan vara att ofrivilligt sälja sin egen kropp. För oss här inne så är det självklart. Vi tror på och kämpar för en värld där kvinnor lever fria från diskriminering, trakasserier och förtryck. där kvinnor har lika villkor, ekonomisk frihet och kan lämna en destruktiv relation. Vi i fackföreningsrörelsen måste stå bakom den modiga kamp som kvinnor världen över för varje dag. Flickor i Afghanistan som kämpar för sin frihet. Kvinnor i Iran som dör för rätten att bestämma över sin egen kropp. Kvinnor och icke-binära i Ukraina som demonstrerar för att även i krig skapa säkra platser för kvinnor och hbtqi-personer. Jag skulle kunna ge hur många exempel som helst, för det sker varje minut. Ni som sitter här bär säkert egna erfarenheter av att ha känt er ifrågasatta eller skändade på grund av ditt kön eller din sexuella läggning. Eller av att ha stått bredvid och sett. Och i allra bästa fall höjt din röst och sagt ifrån. Fackliga rättigheter är kvinnliga rättigheter. Kvinnliga rättigheter är mänskliga rättigheter. Därför yrkar jag och hela den nordiska delegationen bifall till PSI-styrelsens förslag. Tack!
Tack Malin. Nu ska vi hantera resolution.
Thank you, Malin. We're now going to move on to resolution number 4 on reproductive rights for women. It relates to section 3.2 of the action program. Our colleague Bird from USA is going to present resolution number 4. Vicky, you have 3 minutes to do this.
Bird. I am a registered nurse, and I'm a vice president with the American Federation of Teachers in our Nurses and Healthcare Profession Division. I rise today to say that we proudly bring this proposed resolution to the floor in the tradition of our union, standing for equity, civil rights, and human rights for more than 100 years. We in the United States of America are experiencing a rapid rollback and attack on women's rights, as well as minorities, migrants, and others. We condemn misinformation, disinformation, and falsehoods in efforts to recriminalize reproductive rights and to limit access to the full range of reproductive health care. AFT affirms our belief that freedom of personal choice and a woman's control over her intimate, critical life decisions promotes vital physical, psychological, and spiritual health. Let us also remember that present-day and historical attempts to control reproductive rights have always fallen hardest on underserved, unserved communities, these communities already struggling to access basic health care. Reproductive health care includes abortion care. Abortion care is health care. It is a human right. A fair, equitable reproductive health care framework needs to include economic, health, empowerment, and social justice issues, including equal access to affordable contraception, access to family planning, comprehensive sex education, and freedom from sexual abuse and violence. What we all have to say here is rooted in a universal truth for all peoples. Everyone should have the right to self-determination, which includes autonomy, agency, and control over our own bodies. I urge support for this resolution.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm going to give the floor to two people who want to speak in favor of Resolution 4. Asumi Azegawa of Kenzokyo, Japan, has the floor first for 2 minutes.
Greetings, everyone. I come from Asia Pacific region. I am from the National Council of Firefighters, representing firefighters in AP and region in Japan. I am speaking in support and reinforcement of Resolution Number 4, Protection of Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights and Women. In Japan, the government's policy towards ratification of the ILO Convention number 111 on discriminatory treatment has led to hiring of female firefighters. As a result, today, 3.4% of firefighters are now women. However, there has been no end to the number of female firefighters leaving the workforce, and last year alone, 27%.
We will wait for translation.
Can you hear translation? The microphone is on. Can you? It's English. It's English. Into English. Can you hear me?
Okay. We don't have Spanish. Can the translator to Spanish please say something when you're ready? It's okay? We have Spanish? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. You can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to begin from the beginning, if you may allow me. Greetings to everyone. I am Asumi Hasegawa from the National Council of Firefighters, an organization representing firefighters in the AP region in Japan. I am speaking in support and reinforcement of Resolution Number 4, Protection of Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights and Women. In Japan, the government's policy toward ratification of the ILO Convention number 111 on discriminatory treatment has led to hiring of female firefighters today. As a result, today, 3.4% of firefighters are women. However, at the same time, there has been no end to the number of female firefighters leaving the workforce, and just last year, 27% of them left the workforce. Women are routinely assigned to departments they do not wish to work in because of the possibility of them becoming pregnant after marriage, or they are told to refrain from becoming pregnant. It is unacceptable that those who became firefighters out of a strong sense of mission and desire to protect people's lives have their human rights violated because they are women. They are without the sexual and reproductive health rights that they can enjoy, and they are restricted on their private reproductive choices. Increasing the number of female firefighters will also ensure that fire and emergency services take into account and consideration the female perspective. We believe that sexual and reproductive rights and the protection of women should be guaranteed in the workplace, where women can continue to work regardless of their profession. Finally, I'd like to say that at this Congress, we have 4 firefighters participating from Japan. I hope that we will have an opportunity to network with you all. I hope that you will come and talk to us. With solidarity, I'd like to conclude my remarks. Tomoni ganbaro. Let's join hands in solidarity is what I'd like to say in Japanese. Please repeat with me in Japanese. Tomoni ganbaro. Please repeat in Japanese.
Thank you. Oscar Ramirez from Vårdförbundet of Sweden is the next speaker for 2 minutes. Sisters and brothers, today I stand before you as a nurse and a trade union colleague. Everyone must have access to safe abortion. It's a matter of health and right. Girls, young women, and everyone who can become pregnant. Some unwanted pregnancies can happen for all sorts of reasons, and when they don't have access to abortion, they take things into their own hands with risk to life often. The fact that abortion is restricted is a problem. Not to have access to safe abortion in one's own country has an effect throughout the whole country. We all remember what happened during the pandemic when people didn't have access to safe health care. There's a right, everyone has the human right to determine over their reproductive rights. It's a fundamental pillar of our community. Everyone has the right to control their own body. For care personnel in many countries, they get into difficult situations. In some cases, nurses or doctors refuse abortions on behalf of the whole hospital. In some countries, abortion is severely restricted. Some 47,000 women around the world die every year because they do not have access to safe abortions. Unsafe abortions thus become one of the main reasons for women's deaths around the world. Some 7 million women around the world die because of unsafe abortions. Every 7th minute, one does. And that can also lead to terrible complications afterwards, such as infertility and sepsis. We are all here to improve the world we live in. I'm here speaking to all of you. We all must have the right to our own, control our own bodies. Restricted abortion rights are something we will never be able to accept. We will always stand up for this right. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the last person who asked to speak to Resolution 4, so we can now put Resolution 4 to the vote, Resolution 4 on reproductive and sexual rights. Would you please get ready to vote? All those in favor of Resolution 4, please raise your delegate cards. If you're in favor of Resolution 4, thank you. Those against Resolution 4, raise your delegate's card now. Thank you. I declare Congress has adopted Resolution number 4. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to give the floor to Liven Nolan of Unison, who is going to address 3.4 in the action program.
Nurse and president of Unison, it is great pride to say that the UK's beloved National Health Service, since its founding, has been dependent on and welcomed migrant and refugee workers. And welcoming them into Unison, ensuring they can access their rights at work and take up positions in our union is extremely important. But the NHS is in a continual funding and staffing crisis, especially when we have a Conservative right-wing government, the most right-wing in my lifetime, who are dismantling the public health service, our NHS, and in favour of privatisation. This and an ageing workforce. We are seeing hundreds of thousands quitting due to extreme stress from overwork and low pay. But instead of investing in the training of sufficient numbers of nurses and providing a decent work offer, our right-wing racist government is once again recruiting nurses from the global south, simply because they are cheaper and easier to exploit. This week, our Nepali trade union comrades told me how their public health service gets nothing in return for sending their nurses to the UK, a country on the WHO red list. No investment in the quality of public hospital infrastructure or supporting an increase in training standards. Upon arrival, most are poorly supported in and out of work. Those sent to the private sector are often left with huge recruitment fee debt. And when they return home, no automatic right to social security or pathway back to decent work to share their new skills and experiences. We call for tripartite government-to-government agreements and to ensure each union has the capacity to represent and support their members, including the pre- and post-departure. As trade unionists on the shop floor, we are the go-to support, the collective power that ensures their employment rights are protected and they have a place where they belong. And when we've been on strike this year in the NHS, our picket lines have shown the importance of migrant workers. Solidarity is the way to fight racism and race hate. Working with my comrades from around the world, We need more trade unionists on the shop floor to organise and oppose racism. And as trade unionists, we always declare, and we say it loud and we say it clear, refugees and migrants are welcome here. Congress, Unison firmly supports this programme of action. Let's work together to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me pass on some practical information. As you know, colleagues, we're coming closer to the lunch break, and obviously there will be lunch. What we're going to do now, however, is that we're going to deal with proposed Amendment 26 and Resolution 9. So we need to do Amendment 26 and Resolution 9 before we break for lunch. That means that Amendment 28 will come up for discussion this afternoon under Section 16. Amendment 28 will be dealt with in the afternoon, and Section 3.8 as well. And we will then take the vote on the whole of Section 3 of the Programme of Action. Since we have many speakers who want to take the floor, and I think that's great. It's nice that many people want to speak. Many have asked to speak to Amendment 28. So would I ask you who've asked to speak to take note of the fact that you will have 1.5 minutes to speak on behalf of Amendment 28. I know it's frustrating because you probably prepared your statement, but we have a lot to deal with and the time is limited. So those of you who are going to speak to Amendment 28, get ready to do so this afternoon, and you'll only have 1.5 minutes. We're now going to go back to Amendment 26.
Delfin
Sensky of FLNV SE of France is going to move Amendment 26. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Dear comrades, in a global context where barriers are growing in number and where more and more countries build walls, we have to carry solidarity rather than folding up on ourselves. There is no migratory crisis, as some politicians make us believe. This is more of a crisis of the welcome. Governments are refusing to shoulder the responsibility before the drama is taking place. It is urgent to equip people with means to welcome refugees that are running away from war, misery or drought. And by 2050, I think this is going to be something that gets worse and worse, with more than 216 million who could be migrants, climatic migrants, in the 6 regions of the world, says several reports. And this obviously goes through social change, in-depth social change. This has to be stopped. This capitalist system has to be stopped that mishandles women and massacres climate while safeguarding the dividends of a minority social class which is more and more greedy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delphine. There are no further speakers to Amendment 26. So that means I can put Amendment 26 to the vote. Would all in favor of Amendment 26 please hold up your delegate's card? Those in favor of Amendment 26, raise your delegate's card, please. Thank you. Now, those who are against Amendment 26 are kindly requested to raise their delegate's card. If you're against Amendment 26, raise your delegate's card now. Congress has adopted Amendment 26. Thank you very much.
Låter vi ändringsförslag nummer 28 vänta till.
As I said before, Amendment 28 is held in abeyance until this afternoon, Section 16, and we're going to move on to Resolution number 9. And I'm just about to get the names of those who are going to address this.
Och jag välkomnar då Dr.
Kabiru Adu Sami from Medical and Health Workers Union of Nigeria.
You're welcome to speak. Du har 3 minuter. You have 3 minutes och kommer föredra resolution nummer 9. Varsågod.
You're going to move resolution 9.
Resolution 9 on refugees and internally displaced persons in Africa and Arab countries. This is submitted by the Medical and Health Workers Union of Nigeria on behalf of Africa and Arab countries. First and foremost, I would like to appreciate the Public Services International for the internally displaced persons project in Nigeria, other parts of Africa, and the Arab region. So far, with the assistance of the Public Services International and the various officers in charge, we've been able to run a series of advocacies and campaigns, and this is currently influencing public policies in Nigeria. We have also provided palliatives for IDPs, that's internally displaced persons, in our countries, in the various camps, and there is high and increased awareness level so far. Mindful of the severe stress that all working people in the refugee and IDP communities is facing currently, especially health workers, and the dangers that frontline health workers and families are exposed to, including abduction and death, the Medical and Health Workers Union of Nigeria decided to forward this resolution on refugees and internally displaced persons, and we are craving your indulgence to support this very important resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no further requests to speak to Resolution 9. It is supported by the Executive Board. Since there are no further speakers, I'm going to put Resolution 9 to the vote. Please get ready to vote. Those in favor of Resolution 9, raise your delegate's card now, please. Those in favor of Resolution 9. Thank you. You can take down your hands. Those opposed to Resolution 9, please raise your delegate's card now. Thank you very much. I declare that Congress has adopted Resolution number 9. It's carried. Thank you very much. Now we're doing very well as far as time is concerned, so that gives you a little bit of time to prepare for the afternoon session. May I ask you all to remember that if you wish to take the floor this afternoon, if you want to speak to any of the points that are on the agenda for this afternoon, you have to hand in your request before lunch if you want to speak this afternoon. What are we going to deal with this afternoon? It's the action program, section 4, a global economy within planetary limits, with the exception of 4.2. And we're also going to discuss amendments to section 4. That's 40, 41, 43, 45, 46, and 47. And member affiliate resolutions 13 and 14 with amendment 67. And we also have resolution 39. And then, as I said before, we'll revert to section 3 of the action program and discuss amendments 28 and 29. If you wish to take part in the debate this afternoon, you have to put your name down now and ask for the right to speak. Before we close, I'd like to thank the Secretariat, who works so hard and provide us with such fantastic support here, all the staff who are helping this Congress to move ahead the way it does. I would like to thank you for letting me chair this session, and I ask you to applaud the staff and Secretariat. Thank you.